Margaery Tyrell stood by the tall window in her temporary quarters, gazing out over the sprawl of King's Landing. The late afternoon sun bathed the rooftops in a hazy gold, turning the red-tiled city into a shimmering sea of sunset colors. From these heights, she could almost imagine the city at peace, its suffering soothed, its masses content. But the closer you drew, the clearer the cracks became. The city was rife with hunger, anger, and old resentments. The smell from the cramped streets below, even now, wafted in if the wind blew just right. But it was not that stench which brought Margaery a sense of unease today. It was a new suspicion, something intangible, something that glowed green in the darkest corners of her thoughts. It had all begun 3 days ago. The faith militant had temporarily released her from the Great September, granting her back a semblance of her old life, on the condition that she behave as their vigilant eyes and ears within the Red Keep. They expected her to uphold the purity of the faith, to influence her family, her husband, and the courtiers. They believed Margaery had been humbled, that she was a devout convert eager to preserve the righteousness of the realm. How often she had smiled serenely and nodded, all while her mind worked furiously behind calm, doe-like eyes. Her grandmother, Olenna Tyrell, had impressed upon her long ago that a queen's greatest weapon was not a sword or even an army, but her wits. And so Margaery used hers in earnest, playing both sides, gleaning rumors that trembled on the edges of every conversation. Lately, something had begun to bother her. The chatter in the corridors, the hush of certain guards. There was talk of Cersei's isolation, her mounting desperation, and a whispered mention of Wildfire. There were always stories about the Mad King and his caches of wildfire hidden beneath the city. Tales told at feast halls about the day Tyrion Lannister used wildfire on Stannis Baratheon's fleet in Blackwater Bay. People seldom forgot the sight of green flame devouring men alive. But these days the whispers were different. They held fear that the substance might be in the wrong hands again. Margaery delicately fingered a letter she held, an innocuous note from a seamstress about new fabrics for the coming winter. Within those lines, though, were coded references to some questionable deliveries made to a place near the Great September. Her seamstress was no ordinary needle and thread tradeswoman. She was a quiet informant for Olenna's network. The mention of large wooden barrels, heavily guarded, was enough to rekindle the gossip about Wildfire. Now, Margaery's heart pounded each time she reflected on it, each time she connected it with the tension that clung to Cersei like a second skin. She suspected that if Cersei believed she had no way out, she might do something unthinkable. The woman was already at odds with the faith, with the Tyrells, even with her own son's counsel. Sometimes, the rumors said she had turned to Qyburn's dark experiments. Other times, they claimed she was conjuring a demon. But more realistically, and more alarmingly, Cersei Lannister might resort to Wildfire, that monstrous green flame that once threatened to turn the city into ash under the Mad King. Margaery felt a need to confirm her suspicions, but it would not be easy. She turned away from the window and summoned the bravery to proceed. This was no trifling matter. She had to find proof, then decide what to do with that proof, all while ensuring she would not simply vanish into the depths of the Red Keep's dungeons, or into the hands of the faith who might crush her for playing them false. A knock at the door. "Your Grace," came a man's voice. It was the young brother Lancel, once of House Lannister and now garbed in the austere robes of the faith militant. He was here to escort her to evening prayers with the High Sparrow, or so he would claim. Margaery suspected that escorting was little more than guarding. "Yes, Brother Lancel," she called softly, releasing the letter into the concealed pocket of her gown. She took a breath to calm the rapid pounding in her chest. She had faced worse. She had faced real captivity, endured the humiliations of imprisonment, and come out on the other side with her mind intact. She was Margaery Tyrell. She would not falter now. The corridor felt cold, despite torches guttering in wall sconces. Margaery watched Lancel from the corner of her eye as they walked. He kept a somber countenance, as if he believed his unwavering gravity might hide the cracks in his soul. She remembered him from years ago at court, a timid Lannister cousin who once served as King Robert's cupbearer. Then, He had been overshadowed by all the bright golden-haired Lannisters with prouder lineage. Now, a broken man with shaved hair in a simple robe, he was a dog at the High Sparrow's heel. The faith had shown him a path of repentance, atonement, so they said, but Margaery suspected it was more about forgetting the pain of his own sins. He escorted her to the High Sparrow. Margaery smiled politely as they arrived. The High Sparrow was finishing a meal of stale bread with a few other sparrows around a rough wooden table. Their gazes, though mild, made Margaery constantly aware of their presence. She performed the simple, demure courtesy that the faith expected. A slow bow of her head and a calm, serene voice. The High Sparrow greeted her, patting the seat next to him. "How fares your heart today, my child?" he asked softly. She allowed a humble smile. "Filled with the light of the seven, your holiness." She bowed her head in feigned modesty. "And with gratitude that my sins have been forgiven." He studied her, his dark eyes forever searching. Sometimes, she felt he might see the truth beneath her polite words. But if he did, he gave no sign. "And your husband? Have you found Prince Tommen's resolve to strengthen his own faith?" She had to be careful, had to weigh every word. "I speak with him as often as I can. He is torn between many duties, between me, his mother, the burden of his crown. But I do see in him a kindness and a yearning to do what is right for all in this realm." The High Sparrow picked up a chipped cup of water. "His mother's hold on him is strong, but you are a virtuous influence. I hope you will continue to encourage him to seek the faith. We must see this realm cleansed of the corruption that festers in high places. Do you understand, child?" Margaery nodded, though her mind was a swirl of intentions more complicated than any vow. "Yes, I do. I live to serve the seven." Perhaps placated, he sipped his water and set it back down. The meal concluded with a short prayer. Then, he bade her good night, and Lancel rose to escort her back. She returned to her chamber, her face serene, but once the door shut behind her, her eyes lit with fierce determination. She rang for a servant and asked that a small meal be brought to her. Her captivity, such as it was, included constant watchfulness from the faith. But if she could only craft a moment's privacy somehow, perhaps by excusing handmaids and dismissing the guards posted at her door for a bit, she might slip a letter out to her grandmother or to her father, Mace Tyrell. She needed their help, and soon. That night, she slept only in brief snatches. Horrid images haunted her. Bright green flames erupting in the great September, devouring innocent onlookers, lords and small folk alike. She pictured Cersei high in a tower, lips curved in a triumphant grin as she watched the city burn. Each time Margaery startled awake, her heart drummed, and each time, she whispered to herself that she must act swiftly. The next morning, Margaery feigned a headache and asked for a few hours of solitude to pray and reflect. The faith, believing they had her under control, allowed it. She made sure the guards left her be, though she was certain they lingered near. She quickly penned a short letter to her grandmother using a thin piece of parchment she concealed beneath the modest books of prayers. "I believe the rumors to be true. See. Prepare something with the power to raise us all. Barrels smuggled near the great September wildfire suspected. Have your eyes confirm. Act soon. We must end this threat or reveal it. The city's life depends on it." She coded part of it with tiny references to flowers, like a short poem about a garden's green rot, so that if the letter was intercepted, it might be dismissed as nonsense or a complaint about diseased plants. She folded it, sealing it with a plain wax. Then she clutched it in her hand and waited. When a handmaid finally brought her midday meal, always someone from the faith's new staff, Margaery carefully slipped the letter into the folds of the woman's apron. The woman's eyes widened in confusion. "For the Dowager Lady Tyrell," Margaery whispered under her breath. "Be discreet." Then, as though the matter was settled, she moved back to her meal. The servant paused a moment, swallowed, then nodded. Her pious training taught her obedience. If the queen gave an order, she would follow it as best she could. Whether or not the woman understood the letter's contents, Margaery doubted. But the seal was plain, and hopefully it would reach Olenna, or at least her father, if grandmother was unreachable. Days passed without clear response, but Margaery knew better than to panic. She continued her charade, the dutiful wife, the pious queen, while surreptitiously gathering tidbits. She discovered that the king, her husband Tommen, was prohibited from seeing her in private. The faith, suspicious that Margaery might lead the king astray from their guidance, always had watchers. Yet Margaery's gentle demeanor and kind smiles earned her a semblance of trust from some lesser sparrows, who might whisper to her bits of what they heard in the city. That was how she learned an ominous detail. Large, covered wagons had been seen traveling from the direction of a known alchemist's storehouse near the Blackwater. One sparrow cryptically told her that the last time he'd seen wagons like that, it was in the lead-up to the Battle of the Blackwater, when the city had braced for Stannis Baratheon. The wagons had been filled with wildfire to be used in Tyrion Lannister's cunning trap. Now, a cold dread took hold of Margaery's heart whenever she pictured Cersei's face. The older woman seldom appeared in public these days, rarely left her chambers, and it seemed as if Qyburn and a few loyal servants were her only companions. She had been forcibly parted from Tommen by the faith's demands. Only the king could choose to see his mother, but such visits were under heavy supervision. The entire city watched and whispered about the rumor that Cersei's upcoming trial by the faith would be humiliating if not downright fatal. She had refused to atone. She had refused to repent. All she did was brood in the shadows. What was she planning? For Margaery, the puzzle pieces fit. If Cersei believed no recourse remained, she might destroy her enemies in the September with one violent strike. That would certainly include the High Sparrow, the Faith Militant, and Margaery herself. Each time Margaery's eyes flicked up at the grand dome of the Great September as she traveled to or from her daily devotions, she sensed the tension in the air. The devout inside prayed, but did they feel that coil of tension in the very stones beneath their feet? Something waited beneath them, a monstrous secret. Margaery would not let it happen. On the 5th day after she sent the letter, her father, Mace Tyrell, arrived in the city with a modest retinue, less grand than his usual extravagant show but large enough to catch attention. He claimed to be there on business with the crown. Margaery had no chance to greet him formally or privately. The faith militants scurried around, ensuring that father and daughter did not have unsupervised contact. But that evening, a new handmaid arrived, bearing a fresh letter from Olenna Tyrell. The older lady had departed King's Landing earlier in the original timeline, outraged by the faith's arrests. But the letter she sent, in the same subtle code, read, "We have verified the sickly green in the garden. Rot burrows near the September. Further evidence suggests a vast store has been placed in secret tunnels. This must not blossom. Am negotiating with the faith. Be prepared." Margaery's stomach twisted. Confirmation. Wildfire was indeed being placed, and presumably for a catastrophic purpose. Olenna's mention of "must not blossom" was an urgent caution. She likely was trying to see if the faith or the crown's small council would intervene. If they did not, a more radical plan might be needed. But in the meantime, Margaery was in imminent danger. If Cersei found a way to detonate those caches during the trial, everyone inside would be obliterated. That night, Margaery did not sleep. She paced her chamber, thinking. She considered trying to break free, to run from the September or from King's Landing entirely. But that would solve nothing. Cersei might still unleash wildfire to destroy the faith, or the city might burn in the chaos, Tommen included. And Margaery doubted she could simply vanish without suspicion. The faith had eyes everywhere. For them, she was both prized and precarious. They needed her to hold Tommen in thrall, to ensure that the crown would not move against them. It was near dawn when she found her chance. She had drifted onto her bed, half-dressed, her head heavy with exhaustion. A soft knocking at her door roused her, and she sat up quickly, heart pounding. "Yes," she said. A muffled voice answered. "Your Grace, the High Sparrow has summoned you to early prayer." Margaery exhaled. Another day of the same dance. She asked for a moment, then rose and dressed carefully, choosing a modest gown of pale blue that covered her from neck to wrist. Exactly what the faith wanted to see. She concealed her growing fury at the circumstances. Brother Lancel came once again. She fell into step beside him. As they descended the corridors, the morning's gloom lay thick over the Red Keep. The sun had barely risen, and the flickering torches in the halls made ominous shadows on the walls. Margaery was about to speak, some polite pleasantry, when she caught movement at the far end of the hallway. A slight figure, cloaked in plain brown, stepped forward, meeting her gaze. It was a girl from the House Tyrell retinue, one of Olenna's informants. Margaery paused, flicking her eyes briefly to Lancel, who had not yet noticed. The girl lifted a small token, shaped like the rose of House Tyrell, and pressed it to her heart. Then she turned and vanished. A silent message. Her family had someone inside the Red Keep, right under the Faith's nose. A small surge of relief washed over Margaery. In the Great September, the High Sparrow led a procession of devout prayers. The supplicants filled the main hall, but not so many as to be overwhelming. The Faith militant flanked the walls, their boiled leather and cudgels a stark reminder that piety in King's Landing now came with armed enforcement. As Margaery kneeled in the front, she could sense the intense hush. Even so, her eyes flicked around, searching for the telltale signs of hidden barrels or the presence of alchemists. She saw none, but that did not soothe her. When the prayer was done, the High Sparrow led her into a side chamber. The stone floors echoed their footsteps as the door closed behind them. 2 sparrows took positions at the entrance, effectively blocking her from leaving. The High Sparrow turned to her, his voice soft but firm. "Daughter, do you feel the Seven's love warming you?" Margaery folded her hands, letting her eyes go soft. "Of course," she said. "Each day, I repent for the falseness of my past transgressions." He watched her, his gaze heavy. "You are changed, yes, but are you changed enough? These are perilous times. The Queen Mother, Cersei, stands at the brink of her trial. The rumors swirl that she may attempt violence against the Faith. Some even speak of Wildfire." He paused, letting that word linger in the air. "Have you heard any such rumors?" Her pulse quickened, but she forced her face to remain calm. "I have only heard faint whispers, Your Holiness, nothing of certainty." She gave a sorrowful look. "If Queen Mother were to turn to such monstrous means, I shudder to imagine what might happen." He studied her carefully. The High Septon of old could have done little, but times have changed. We stand strong now. King Tommen supports the Faith, or so I believe. Perhaps you might confirm whether the king knows of these rumors and what he might do about them. The words were a subtle test and an order. Margaery nodded. "I will try, Your Holiness." "Good." He laid a hand on her shoulder, as if in paternal blessing. "Remember, daughter, if you learn anything, you must bring it to me at once. The Faith has placed its trust in you. Do not betray that trust." She bowed her head. "Yes, Your Holiness." With that, the conversation was done. He motioned for the sparrows to open the door, and she was guided out into the corridor again. She felt the tension rising in her chest. The High Sparrow was suspicious, or at least aware something was amiss. If she did not act soon, everything would collapse. Cersei might strike first, or the Faith might sense Margaery's deception and imprison her once more. She was losing time. That evening, under the guise of a small audience with her father, Margaery managed a brief, whispered exchange. Mace Tyrell, though often derided as a braggart or a fool, was not entirely without cunning, especially after Olenna had hammered caution into him. They embraced publicly, father and daughter, tears in his eyes as if they were simply reuniting after a sorrowful separation. But as Margaery's cheek pressed to her father's chest, she whispered fiercely, "You've confirmed it?" "Yes," he replied in a strained whisper. "Your grandmother's informants found at least a dozen barrels in the tunnels. Likely more. Hidden, guarded by men loyal to Qyburn. It's definitely Wildfire." She pulled back, her eyes wide with feigned familial love, but her voice trembling in the hush. "We must stop it. If Cersei triggers it during the trial." Mace's wide mustache bristled. "I've tried to speak to the king's men, but Tommen is too shielded by the Faith. And they suspect me. We must think carefully. The Faith themselves must be told, forced to act. If they know Cersei is planning to kill them and the entire city, they might end her first. Margaery swallowed. She loathed the idea of empowering the Faith further, but at this point it might be the only option. Then we must expose her in a way they can't deny. We need proof in front of them all. If we confront Cersei directly, she'll deny it. We have to show the Faith, the crown, and the city what she's done. She touched her father's arm. I'll try to arrange a meeting with the High Sparrow tomorrow. Bring the evidence. Mace nodded. I'll have men discreetly bring a sample. Gods be good, Margaery. This is a dangerous game. Are you certain you can trust the Faith? No, she murmured grimly. But if they realize their own lives are at stake, they'll act. Cersei will have no choice but to stand down. They parted before the Watchers could suspect anything untoward. Margaery's heart throbbed with the burden of it all. The city's fate weighed on her. One misstep and everything would explode into green flame. Another misstep and she would face the inescapable wrath of the High Sparrow. She had to navigate carefully. She returned to her chambers to find a visitor waiting. Qyburn. He stood with hunched shoulders, robed in deep gray, his pallid face twisted into a polite smile. The guard outside announced him as the Lord's chosen master of whispers, which made Margaery's spine tingle with caution. Qyburn inclined his head in greeting. Your Grace, the Queen Mother sends her regards, he said softly. She regrets that she has not been able to see you, but she hopes for your well-being. Margaery maintained her composure, letting only a hint of curiosity show. That is kind of her, she replied. How does she fare? He allowed a small smile. As well as can be expected, given these trying circumstances. She asked me to deliver a message, if I might do so privately. Margaery dismissed the Faith handmaid who lingered near the door. The woman looked reluctant but stepped out. Margaery kept herself poised. Speak freely, Master Qyburn. I doubt you and I have any secrets from the Faith, but we may pretend for a moment. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Her Grace, the Queen Mother, is concerned for your safety. She knows you are under the watchful eye of the High Sparrow. She wonders if you might be unhappy with your predicament. She wonders if you might consider a more mutually beneficial arrangement. Margaery's heart thumped. And what arrangement would that be? Qyburn stepped closer, lowering his voice. One in which we ensure the Faith's power is curtailed and you and the king remain safe, free of this militant piety. An arrangement in which House Tyrell might benefit and House Lannister as well. She kept her face impassive, but inside she bristled. So this was Cersei's attempt at forging an alliance, or at least luring Margaery into an action. She suspected Cersei wanted her cooperation to sabotage the Faith's growing influence. If Margaery pretended to go along, perhaps Cersei might reveal more. I must admit, Margaery said softly, the Faith's hold has been stifling. The king cannot move freely, nor can I. If Queen Mother can offer a solution, I'd be inclined to listen. Qyburn nodded. Excellent. I advise caution, though. The Faith's eyes are everywhere. If you would be amenable, the Queen Mother suggests a private meeting in her solar tomorrow evening, under the guise of discussing your joint concern for King Tommen. A mother and a wife worried about the boy king. How could the Faith object to that? Margaery breathed in slowly. I see. I will consider it. Thank you, Master Qyburn. Please give the Queen Mother my regards. With a bow, he withdrew. Margaery was left alone, her mind spinning. A private meeting tomorrow evening, just as she planned to gather the High Sparrow and her father to confront the question of Wildfire. It was convenient timing, almost too convenient. She considered the possibility of a trap. If Cersei suspected that Margaery was searching for proof about the Wildfire, perhaps she wanted to lure Margaery somewhere quiet and eliminate her. Or perhaps she hoped to force Margaery into a show of solidarity that would discredit Margaery before the Faith. It was a viper's nest, every corner bristling with threats. Nevertheless, Margaery decided that she would attend that meeting, if only to observe Cersei closely. She might glean how close the Queen Mother was to unleashing her monstrous plan. She would have to time it so that the confrontation with the Faith took place before Cersei had a chance to act. Yes, that would be the best approach. Tomorrow, Margaery would set her final gambit in motion. She spent the night again sleepless, but more resolute. Early the next morning, she requested a conversation with the High Sparrow. She found him in the same side chamber as before. He greeted her in his usual grave manner. Before he could speak, she curtsied and said, "I have urgent information. I must share it with you at once, if you will permit." He nodded, signaling the attending sparrows to step away. Not out of earshot, but at least they would not interrupt. "Speak, child," the High Sparrow said. Margaery took a breath. "I have learned, through those loyal to me, that the Queen Mother has stored barrels of wildfire beneath the city. Specifically, beneath the Great September." A ripple of shock passed over the men at the door. Margaery continued, her voice carefully pitched. "She intends to ignite them during her trial, to eradicate the Faith and all who stand in her way." She saw how the High Sparrow's lips thinned, his complexion turning a shade paler. "Wildfire, you are certain?" "I am," she said clearly. "I have men ready to bring you proof. They have discovered at least a dozen caches. We must expose this and remove them, or all of us could perish." The High Sparrow's eyes were dark with mounting outrage. "This is a grievous sin, an attack on the Seven themselves. If it is true—" He trailed off, his fists tightening at his sides. Then he fixed Margaery with a piercing look. "Why bring this to me now?" She held his gaze, letting her voice tremble just enough to sound earnest. "Because I no longer doubt what Queen Mother is capable of. I want to protect my king. I want to protect the people of King's Landing from a horror not seen since the days of the Mad King. I need you to help me do it." He held silent for a moment, measuring her words. Then he motioned for Lancel, who stood nearby, to join them. "Tell me, Margaery Tyrell, do you have evidence? Something tangible?" "My father is in possession of a small sample from the caches. We can bring it here this afternoon, if you will gather your Faith militant to witness. I only ask for your protection when we make our claim. The Queen Mother is desperate. She may try to harm us if we speak openly." The High Sparrow's voice rang with fervor. "The Faith militant fears no queen, no matter her cruelty. Bring your proof. Should it be confirmed, we will ensure her sin is revealed to all. The crown will have no choice but to see the truth. And if the king stands in the way of our cleansing justice—" Margaery quickly interjected, "Please, let us be careful. Tommen is but a boy. He must not be harmed if we can avoid it. But Cersei must not be allowed to carry out her plan." The High Sparrow considered her words. At last he nodded. "So be it. Bring your proof by midday. I will gather my faithful. We shall see justice done." Margaery dipped her head, relief and trepidation mingling in her chest. The trap was set. Now she only needed to ensure her father delivered the sample, and then, in the aftermath, the city discovered Cersei's plan in a public, undeniable manner. Ideally, Cersei would be stripped of power immediately with no chance to strike. Yet Margaery also had that meeting with Cersei herself scheduled for the evening. She would need to be careful not to corner a wounded lioness too soon. A single misstep could still mean an inferno. Shortly before midday, Margaery stood in the antechamber of the Great September alongside her father, Mace, who carried a small sealed clay jar. Around them stood nearly 24 members of the Faith militant, led by Lancel and 3 Septons. The High Sparrow arrived, his face grim. "We are ready," he said. Mace stepped forward, handing the jar to Lancel. "Take caution," he warned. "We used gloves and careful handling to bring it here. It is a smaller portion taken from a larger store. If you open it, do so gently." Lancel nodded, removing the lid with delicate hands. Inside, a thick greenish substance glimmered in the light. Even a small whiff of it made the gathered men recoil slightly in alarm. It had a sulphurous tang. Lancel closed it again, lips pressed tight. "Wildfire," he confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. One or two other sparrows nearly crossed themselves in fear. The High Sparrow stared at it. "It is as you said," he murmured. Then he turned to Margaery. "Where exactly was this taken from?" She indicated her father, who explained, "One of our informants found hidden tunnels beneath the city connected to the old Targaryen storehouses. Several barrels, each marked with alchemical sigils, were being guarded by men under Qyburn's command. My men quietly seized one small portion to bring here." The High Sparrow's eyes shone with righteous anger. "May the Seven protect us." Cersei Lannister would turn their holy place into a pit of hellfire. Margaery breathed a little easier. Finally, the Faith had irrefutable evidence. "We must act swiftly," she said, "before she moves to detonate it." The High Sparrow nodded. "We will do so. We will send the Faith militant into those tunnels, seize the barrels, and bring them out under the light of day for all the city to see. We will remove them from Cersei's grasp. Then we will confront her with her crime." Margaery had a fleeting vision of King Tommen's horror when he learned of his mother's betrayal. It nearly broke her heart, but there was no helping it now. Better a broken heart than a burnt city. "Thank you, Your Holiness," she said. "Shall I accompany you?" He shook his head. "You should remain here, for your own safety, and for the king's comfort. If we fail to find the barrels, or if we meet resistance, we shall call upon you to reveal what you know. But you must not risk the wrath of the Queen Mother's men." Margaery acquiesced. She and her father watched as Lancel and a squad of Faith militant left with the jar, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors of the September. The High Sparrow turned to Margaery. "You have done a great service to the city," he said quietly. "If all is as you say, Seven bless you." Margaery inclined her head, uncertain how much blessing she truly desired from this man, but aware that for the moment, they were allies. "I only hope the city may rest without fear." The hours that followed seemed to stretch painfully. Margaery and her father waited in the great September, pacing amid the rows of pews. She noticed scattered worshippers kneeling or lighting candles, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath their feet. Occasionally, a sharp sound or a muffled commotion echoed through the stone, raising her heartbeat. At last, as dusk neared, Lancel and his men returned. They looked battered but victorious. Their armor bore scratches, and one man limped badly, but they carried out a macabre trophy, the battered remains of a wooden barrel marked with green glyphs. It had been battered open, the wildfire presumably removed or contained. Lancel bowed to the High Sparrow. "There were more than a dozen," he said. "We seized them all. Some men loyal to Qyburn attempted to stop us, but they were few. We overcame them. The barrels now lie in a safe place watched over by the Faith. We will dispose of them under the watch of the alchemists, ensuring no one else uses them." The High Sparrow's face reflected grim satisfaction. "You have done the Seven's work. We have averted a great evil." He turned to Margaery and Mace. "This calls for a public revelation. The city must see Cersei Lannister for what she is." Margaery nodded. "Will you summon her to the September?" "Yes, at once. I will demand her presence, along with the king. We shall reveal her crime in front of the gathered Faith and the court. We will see how she answers for herself." A flicker of worry stirred in Margaery. She recalled the meeting arranged for that evening. Cersei had invited her. That meant Cersei might have set her own trap. But it was nearly dusk already, and the High Sparrow was about to act. Perhaps it was better to confront Cersei right now, in the open, with all the Faith's strength behind them. "We mustn't let her slip away," Margaery said. "She may have other caches or other plans." Lancel, sweat shining on his brow, nodded. "We will bring her by force if she refuses to come." The High Sparrow clutched his staff. "Let us see justice done." A swarm of messages flew to the Red Keep, summoning the Queen Mother and the King to the Great September under the Faith's authority. Margaery braced herself as word spread among the city's inhabitants. Crowds began to gather around the Great September, sensing something big was happening. Rumors took flight, that the Faith had discovered a monstrous plot, that the Queen Mother was to be shamed. Some believed the Tyrells might be seizing power. Others worried that the king himself was threatened. Tension crackled in the air. Night fell. Torches and lanterns glowed outside the September's massive doors, illuminating a gathering of faith militant in a ring around the building. Margaery waited within, perched on a bench near the front, her father at her side, the High Sparrow on the dais. Anxiety coiled in her stomach. At one point, she wondered if Cersei might have fled or might have unleashed another hidden plan. But soon the large doors opened. King Tommen arrived, flanked by a pair of Kingsguard and several Lannister guards. The young king's face was pale, confused. He stared at Margaery as soon as he saw her, his eyes pleading for explanation. Margaery gave him a gentle nod, though her heart ached for him. He was still so young. Cersei did not come. Instead, Qyburn entered, flanked by two of Cersei's guards, including the hulking Ser Robert Strong, that silent giant rumored to be Gregor Clegane resurrected by Qyburn's dark arts. Immediately, the faith militant bristled, hands on their cudgels. The tension in the chamber thickened. Qyburn approached the dais. The High Sparrow's voice rang out. "Where is the Queen Mother? We have summoned her to answer for her crime." Qyburn inclined his head. "Her Grace does not recognize this court you have assembled. She refuses to stand trial tonight. If you wish an official hearing, it must be done under the king's authority in the Red Keep, with the full measure of the law." A storm of murmurs spread throughout the faith militant. The High Sparrow thumped his staff on the floor. "Her crime is not simply a matter of the king's law, it is an affront to the Seven. We have incontrovertible proof that she stored Wildfire beneath this holy place to destroy us all." King Tommen visibly flinched. What is he talking about?" Tommen said, his voice trembling. He turned to Margaery, eyes full of panic. "Is this true?" Margaery approached him gently, placing a calming hand on his arm. "Your Grace, I'm sorry. We have found barrels of Wildfire in the tunnels beneath the September. Men loyal to your mother guarded them. I fear she may have been preparing to use them when she felt cornered by the faith." Tommen stared, uncomprehending, his face going white. He turned sharply to Qyburn. "Is this true? Qyburn, speak." Qyburn gave a practiced expression of regret. "Your Grace, I do not deny that certain caches of Wildfire remain in the city from the days of the Mad King, but no proof exists that Her Grace planned to use them on the September. Many old storerooms remain sealed. Perhaps these were discovered inadvertently by my men, who sought to secure them." Margaery felt a surge of anger at his slippery words. She looked to the High Sparrow, who beckoned Lancel to step forward. Lancel held up the battered piece of a barrel. The reek of sulfur carried across the dais. "We found these men trying to defend the barrels, refusing to let us pass. If it was innocent, why hide them? Why use lethal force? We lost 2 brothers in the fight." The faith militant rumbled in agreement. Tommen looked stricken, glancing between Margaery, the High Sparrow, and Qyburn. "What is the meaning of this? My mother, she wouldn't do such a thing. Would she?" Qyburn knelt, bowing his head low before the king. "I serve at the pleasure of the crown and your mother, but I can only say that we sought to protect the city from dangerous remnants. The faith militant took it upon themselves to assault us. This is a grave misunderstanding, Your Grace." The High Sparrow's voice cut across the hall. "If it is a misunderstanding, let the Queen Mother come and swear before the Seven that she had no malicious intent. Let her stand trial as was decreed. Instead, she hides behind her personal guard. That is an admission of guilt." At that, Ser Robert Strong took a step forward, menacing, but the faith militant formed a protective ring. Margaery quickly interjected. "Your Grace, please. If your mother has nothing to hide, she should come forward and clarify this herself. If she remains absent, it only looks like guilt. We have lost good men uncovering this plot." Tommen swallowed at a loss. His gaze flicked to the doors, as if he expected Cersei to appear. His trembling gave him the air of a lost child. Then, as if summoning the last vestiges of kingly courage, he nodded once. "I order my mother to come here," he said. Qyburn, fetch her at once. Let her face these accusations. Qyburn stood slowly, brushing off his robe. Your Grace, if I may, the Queen Mother is ill. She is not in condition to appear in public tonight. She begs your forgiveness. But, I said fetch her, Tommen repeated, voice cracking slightly. I want answers. Bring her. That is an order. Qyburn's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, Your Grace, he managed. He glanced at Ser Robert Strong, nodded once. Then the monstrous knight turned and strode out of the September. Qyburn lingered, uncertain, then bowed again and followed. The High Sparrow watched them go, eyes cold. Time seemed to slow. Margaery felt Tommen's arm trembling under her hand. She wanted desperately to reassure him, to tell him that everything would be all right. But she couldn't lie. There was no telling how this confrontation might end. The High Sparrow turned to Tommen. Your Grace, while we wait, I suggest we gather the city's lords and small folk. Let them see the truth. Truth should not hide in darkness. Tommen hesitated. Yes, yes, do so. He looked around, clearly overwhelmed, but trying to stand firm. An hour passed, tension mounting with each beat of the flickering torches. Word spread, and in that time, more spectators trickled in, curious and anxious. The entire city had begun to sense that something pivotal was happening. At last, the doors opened once more. A hush fell. Cersei Lannister entered, escorted by Ser Robert Strong and a handful of Lannister men. She wore a dark gown, high-collared, and her golden hair was cropped short from her time in captivity. Her face was a mask of defiance. She swept in, meeting the eyes of the High Sparrow with cold fury, ignoring the stares of the crowd. King Tommen took a step forward, voice trembling with both relief and apprehension. Mother! Cersei's eyes flicked to him, softened for a heartbeat, then returned to their usual hardness. She did not kneel, nor offer any obeisance. Instead, she stood tall before the dais. What farce is this? She demanded, voice ringing against the walls. I am Queen Mother, not a common criminal to be summoned at the whim of a rabble. The High Sparrow lifted his chin. You stand accused of plotting mass murder with Wildfire, to obliterate your enemies and defile the holy September of Baelor. We have evidence of your crime. Cersei laughed, a low, incredulous sound. Evidence? Provided by this band of fanatics? What rubbish are you spouting? Her gaze darted to Margaery. No doubt the Tyrell girl had a hand in this. Margaery met her glare evenly, refusing to flinch. She stepped forward. We found the barrels beneath the September, guarded by your men. The Faith militants seized them. They are secured now, away from your reach. For a moment, a flicker of alarm crossed Cersei's face. Then she smoothed it away. Wildfire remains from the Mad King's era. If your men rummaged around in the old tunnels, no wonder they found some. She looked at Tommen. My son, you cannot believe I would murder you in your own city. This is insane. Tommen shook his head, eyes brimming with confusion. Mother, they said you stored it. In secret that your men fought them. Is it true? Cersei slid her gaze to Qyburn. Did you do this behind my back? She demanded, tone icy. The disgraced maester bowed slightly, his expression guarded. I only did what I believed necessary to protect you, Your Grace, Qyburn said slowly. I discovered these leftover caches. I posted men to ensure they could not be used by your enemies. The Faith militant attacked first. The High Sparrow's staff cracked on the floor again, capturing attention. We found more than a dozen barrels. We lost men in the fighting. That is no mere oversight, Cersei Lannister. These were stockpiled with purpose. Even now, you do not deny it outright. Cersei glared. I see the trap you've laid. How clever. Accuse me of a monstrous crime, manufacture your so-called evidence, and then feed this nonsense to my son to drive a wedge between us. She turned slowly, letting the crowd see her face. Is this what we've come to? A mother forced to defend herself against ludicrous accusations in the House of the Gods. Murmuring spread through the onlookers. Some looked uncertain, others outraged. Margaery felt her pulse throbbing. Cersei was wily, twisting the narrative to paint herself the victim. The High Sparrow's expression hardened. "You call them accusations. Let the seven judge. We shall have a trial here and now. The king is present, the faith is present, and the people of King's Landing are here to witness. Prove your innocence, if you have proof." Cersei's eyes flicked to the dais, scanning the barrel's remains, the battered with stained green. Then she looked back to Tommen. For a long moment, she wore a mask of heartbreak, as if her own child had betrayed her. "I have only my word as your mother and as a Lannister," she said. "But perhaps my word counts for nothing anymore." Tommen took a faltering step forward. "Mother, if you truly had no intention to use the wildfire, then say so under oath, here before the seven." Cersei glowered at him. "You would make me kneel before this rabble of sparrows? Have you forgotten everything I taught you? You are the king." Tommen looked as though he might crumble, but the High Sparrow turned to the crowd. "Cersei Lannister refuses to kneel before the seven. She refuses to deny her crime under oath. All we have seen is that her men stored and guarded wildfire beneath the sacred September. That is not the act of an innocent woman." He paused, letting the tension grow. "By the power granted me by the faith, and by the king's own acceptance of our authority, I declare Cersei Lannister guilty of high treason against the gods and the realm." A roar of protest rose from Cersei's guards, and Ser Robert Strong stepped forward with lethal intent. The faith militant quickly fanned out, cudgels at the ready, steel glinting. The crowd gasped, some pressing back against the walls. The High Sparrow's voice rang out again. "Seize her. Let her face the judgment she deserves." Cersei sneered. "You'll try." She turned to Ser Robert Strong. "Kill anyone who tries to touch me." At once, the monstrous knight lunged forward, scattering a handful of faith militant. One man's head was knocked aside with terrible force. Shouts rang out, chaos ignited. The crowd screamed. King Tommen stumbled backward, nearly falling. Margaery rushed to steady him, heart pounding in panic. "Protect the king!" someone cried. Margaery turned, seeing her father Mace rally a few Tyrell guards who had accompanied them. Swords were drawn, jostling with the faith militant as they converged on Ser Robert Strong. The giant's sword cut a vicious arc, toppling two men at once. But the faith militant were many. They encircled him, clubs raining down upon that thick armor. Arrows whizzed from some hidden archers above, clattering against the knight's plating. He barely seemed to feel them. More roars of confusion echoed as Cersei's smaller retinue joined the fray. Terrified small folk pushed and shoved for an exit. The Great September, meant for worship, became a battleground. Margaery's only thought was to keep Tommen safe. She clutched the king's hand, pulling him toward the side of the dais. "Father, help me!" she cried. Her voice half lost in the din. Mace Tyrell rushed over, pushing through the melee. "This way," he urged, leading them to a side corridor away from the main clash. Lancel and a few faith militant tried to follow, but they were blocked by Ser Robert Strong's raging figure. The giant knight flung men aside like dolls. Blood spattered across the marble floor. Suddenly, in the midst of the chaos, a shrill voice cried out, "Arrest the Queen Mother, for the king!" Margaery glanced back, seeing the High Sparrow calling his faithful to corner Cersei. She stood behind Ser Robert Strong, eyes ablaze with hatred. A maddened grin twisted her lips as she realized she was surrounded. Margaery had seen that look before, the look of a woman who would burn the world rather than yield. A cold dread washed over Margaery. Was there another stash of wildfire somewhere, rigged to blow? Had they truly seized it all? Tommen gripped Margaery's arm, his eyes wild. "We have to stop this," he said. "I don't want bloodshed in the September." She squeezed his hand, feeling the tremor in his grip. "We must get you out, Your Grace. It isn't safe." He tried to protest, but Mace Tyrell ushered them both into the corridor. A handful of Tyrell guards formed a protective ring. Behind them, the clang of weapons, the screams of dying men, and the crash of overturned pews shattered the sanctity of the September. Margaery's heart thundered. This was not how she expected the revelation to go. She had hoped for a swift condemnation, not a slaughter. But Cersei was not the type to surrender quietly. They emerged from the corridor into a side courtyard, breathing in fresh air tinted by the acrid smell of torch smoke. A cluster of small folk watched from the street, eyes wide with shock at the commotion inside. Margaery turned to Tommen. "Your Grace, we need to find a secure place. Let the faith subdue your mother's men. Then we can." She was cut off by a deafening roar from inside the September. Her eyes snapped back toward the building. A column of black smoke soared up. People came pouring out of the main doors, shrieking in terror. "Fire!" someone yelled. Margaery felt dread coil. Had Wildfire been lit? But no. That black smoke looked more like regular flame. Possibly an overturned brazier or torch had ignited the pews. But the risk of wildfire caches remained. Her mouth went dry. Coughing men stumbled out, some with blackened clothing. Tommen stepped forward, as if to run back in, but Margaery held him firm. "No, you can't go in there. It's too dangerous." He shook his head, tears streaming. "That's my mother in there." Margaery's grip tightened. "If you go in, you might die, and the kingdom will be left leaderless. Please, my king." Mace Tyrell and a few guards were already stepping forward, trying to see if they could help quell the fire. Then, with a shuddering crash, part of the wooden scaffolding near the entrance collapsed, sending sparks and embers billowing. Screams redoubled. Margaery was certain many were trapped inside. Faith militant, small folk, perhaps even the High Sparrow. It was chaos incarnate. Suddenly, from a side entrance, Lancel Lannister emerged, coughing heavily, leading a cluster of wounded Faith militant. Blood stained his robes, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping. Margaery rushed to him. "Brother Lancel, what happened?" He looked up, face twisted in pain. "We tried to subdue the Queen Mother. That monstrous night, we set fire to the pews in the struggle. The High Sparrow is pinned beneath wreckage. The place is aflame." He coughed, eyes darting desperately. "I saw her. She was still inside, near the altar, that giant overshadowing her, cutting down anyone who neared. She might have a hidden path out. I don't know." Margaery pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Stay here. Tend to the wounded." She turned to Tommen, who was pale and shaking. "Your Grace, you must remain here. I'll send men in to." Tommen tore away from her. "She's my mother." With a sudden burst of frantic energy, he ran into the side entrance, ignoring Margaery's cry. The Tyrell guards lunged, but the king slipped past them in the confusion. "No!" Margaery shouted, heart lurching. She looked to her father. "We have to get him out of there." Mace nodded, face grim, and together with a squad of guards, they charged after Tommen. Smoke assaulted their lungs immediately. Margaery coughed, tears streaming from the sting. Within the September, the flames had begun licking at wooden pews and tapestries. The heat pressed on them like a living thing. She heard the wails of injured men, glimpsed bodies on the floor. Her stomach churned. This was madness. "Tommen!" she called. "Your Grace! Where are you?" She coughed again, choking on the acrid air. Sparks rained down as part of the gallery above smoldered. She gripped her father's arm to keep from stumbling in the thick smoke. Her eyes watered so badly she could barely see. But then she heard a faint cry. "Help! Over here!" Pushing aside a toppled pew, Margaery and her father spotted a small figure in regal finery, the king struggling to pull at something. They hurried over. Tommen was tugging at a large beam that had fallen across a robed figure. The figure beneath it was none other than the High Sparrow. Even pinned and dying, he looked up in bewilderment. "He, the king, saves me?" he managed through a cracked voice. Mace moved to help Tommen lift the beam, though it was partially ablaze. They managed to heave it off the old man, but he did not rise. His lower body was crushed. He coughed, blood on his lips. "Flee, children of the Seven. the High Sparrow rasped. The fire, not safe. Margaery knelt, ignoring the searing heat of the floor. She realized he was beyond saving. Her eyes flicked around. The flames danced closer, roaring. "We have to go," she urged Tommen. "We have to get you out." Tommen nodded, tears streaming. He looked at the High Sparrow, horror in his face. "Mother, did you see her?" The High Sparrow let out a last breath, his eyes rolling back. Mace Tyrell yanked Tommen away as the flames spread. Margaery led them toward the side exit they had entered from, but a wall of fire had sprung up, blocking the corridor. "Back, we'll try the main doors," she shouted above the roar. They sprinted across the main hall, stepping over debris and fallen men. The smoke was suffocating. Margaery's eyes stung, her lungs burned. They reached the main doors, only to find them jammed by collapsed scaffolding. Guards struggled to clear the wreckage, but the fire was too intense. "We'll find another way," Mace coughed. Margaery took Tommen's hand, forging blindly through the swirling smoke. Her father and a handful of Tyrell men flanked them, trying side passages. One corridor was partially clear, though tendrils of flame were creeping along the walls. They dashed into it. Halfway along, they came upon an astonishing sight. Ser Robert Strong, battered, parts of his armor scorched black, lay motionless on the stone floor. Standing over him was Cersei, her gown singed. In her hand, she clutched a dagger, and her expression was wild, cornered. Tommen cried out, "Mother!" Cersei spun at his voice, eyes filled with an unreadable mix of rage and relief. "Tommen!" She lunged forward, nearly stumbling from the smoke. Margaery stepped back reflexively, but Tommen moved to embrace Cersei. The older woman clung to her son, her face contorted in a furious madness. "They tried to kill me," she hissed. "I had no choice. The faith. They were going to—" She broke off in a coughing fit. Then she looked over Tommen's shoulder, her gaze falling on Margaery. This is your doing." Margaery swallowed hard. The corridor filled with swirling smoke, flaming debris crackling behind Cersei. "I only wanted to prevent you from destroying the city," Margaery said, coughing. "No one had to die." Cersei let out a ragged laugh. "And yet here we are, dying anyway." She looked at Tommen, tears cutting streaks through the soot on her cheeks. "My sweet boy, we must leave this place. Hurry." Tommen nodded frantically. "Yes, we have to get out. It's collapsing." Mace Tyrell and a few guards approached, brandishing weapons uncertainly. Cersei glared at them. Margaery laid a hand on her father's arm, halting him. There was no sense in fighting further. Survival was paramount. She took a step forward, balancing between Cersei's rage and the need to flee. "We have to go now or we all burn," she said. Cersei's eyes flicked to Margaery's outstretched hand, then back to Tommen. For a heartbeat, it seemed she might refuse, might prefer to fight to the death. But the building groaned around them. Flames licked at the edges of the corridor. Finally, Cersei snarled, "Lead the way," then, her voice laced with bitter venom. Together they ran. The floor cracked and buckled in places, but Margaery remembered a side entrance near the back that might still be clear. The group stumbled through the thickening smoke. Even Margaery's father, large and normally unwieldy, forced himself forward with surprising tenacity. Cersei clung to Tommen's arm, half limping from an injury to her ankle. When at last they burst out a small door into the cool night air, the relief was staggering. Coughing, retching, the survivors stumbled onto the stone steps outside. The September rain had begun to patter lightly, an unexpected blessing from the skies. Guards and small folk, seeing the king emerge, rushed forward to offer aid. Shouts went up, "The king is alive!" Margaery fell to her knees, inhaling great gulps of smoke-free air, tears streaming from her burning eyes. Tommen also sank, leaning on his mother, who glowered at all around her but said nothing. The great September of Baelor behind them belched black smoke and flames through its shattered windows. The spire was collapsing chunk by chunk. People wailed in the streets, and the distant sound of frantic bucket lines told of attempts to contain the blaze. Yet, slowly, the fire was burning itself out inside the massive stone walls, leaving only charred wreckage in its wake. The night stretched into early dawn. The faith militant was shattered. Many were dead inside, including the High Sparrow. Others milled in confusion, leaderless. The small council, summoned at once, gathered around King Tommen, Margaery, and a battered, seething Cersei. Word spread quickly that the city had narrowly avoided a larger catastrophe with the wildfire. Some whispered that if the fighting had not erupted, the entire September might have been blown sky-high. Others said the Tyrells and the Faith orchestrated a coup. Rumors abounded, but the visible presence of those wildfire barrels, now dragged out in the open, kept the people fearful of what might have happened. In a hastily arranged courtyard meeting, as dawn's light paled the sky, the small council convened, flanked by trembling courtiers. King Tommen, disheveled and exhausted, presided. At his side, Margaery stood with her father. Across from them, Cersei stood, bearing the fierce indignity of the accusation. The wildfire barrels, or what remained of them, were displayed in the courtyard for all to see, a ghastly green residue clinging to blackened wood. Silence held the gathering until Tommen finally spoke, voice quavering. "I have heard the evidence. I have seen the men who died, the barrels seized. Mother, I must ask you plainly, did you intend to use these weapons against the September?" Cersei's face was as pale as newly fallen snow, her voice bitter. "I never intended to kill you, Tommen, but the Faith, those fanatics, wanted me to atone, to humiliate me. I would not kneel before them. They threatened to take you away, to turn you against me." She drew a shaky breath. "I prepared for the worst." Tommen closed his eyes, fresh tears spilling. "That is not a denial." He covered his face with both hands. Margaery's heart hurt to see him so broken. After a moment, the king forced himself to speak again. "Mother, by my authority as king, you stand accused of treason against the realm, of plotting mass murder with wildfire. For this you must be judged." He lowered his hands, looking at her with all the heartbreak in the world. Cersei's gaze darted around. She saw the Lannister guards who remained loyal to her, saw the Tyrell guards, the small council members, Varys, Pycelle, Kevan Lannister, all ringed around them. Her face became resigned, but her eyes still shone with fury. "Would you truly see your own mother executed?" she asked softly. A hush fell. No one dared speak. Margaery watched Tommen with concern, not wanting him to make a rash decision. The city had been saved from a far more catastrophic doom, but the cost was still horrifying. Countless had died, including the High Sparrow. She could sense the fear in the crowd, the hush of lords and ladies who had expected a triumphant or at least swift resolution. But now the king stood on the edge of the most terrible choice of his young life. At last, Tommen spoke, though his voice was barely audible. "No, I do not want that." Then he looked up, meeting Cersei's gaze, tears trembling on his lashes. "But you cannot remain here. Too many people will call for your head. Too many have died. The Faith, the small folk, House Tyrell, they will never forgive you." Cersei exhaled shakily. "What are you saying?" Tommen squared his shoulders, though his tears continued to fall. "I banish you, mother, from King's Landing and from the court. You will be taken to Casterly Rock, to remain under house arrest. You will renounce all claims to power, all rights of regency. You will never again hold the office of Queen Mother." Cersei's eyes widened with fresh outrage. "You cannot." "I can. I am king," Tommen said, heartbreak fueling his resolve. "And I must protect my people from the fear and chaos you have caused." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Margaery glanced around. Some looked relieved. Others were stunned that Tommen would show so much backbone, even if it was clearly costing him dearly. Cersei inhaled to spew more protests, but she saw the ring of guards around her. She saw Kevan Lannister, her own uncle, standing with grim acceptance. She realized that if she fought, it would only lead to more bloodshed and she would lose. Slowly, She nodded, expression hollow. Then I will go, she spat. Tommen's composure cracked. He turned away so no one could see the tears in his eyes, but Margaery saw them. Gently, she placed a hand on his shoulder, guiding him to a seat. The king sagged down, trembling with silent sobs. Margaery stood beside him, glancing over at her father, who gave a curt nod. House Tyrell had endured. King's Landing was safe from a wildfire inferno, for now. Within hours, the realm's wheels began turning. Kevan Lannister took charge of escorting Cersei back to the Red Keep to gather her belongings under heavy guard. They would depart for Casterly Rock by midday. Tommen, physically and emotionally drained, returned to the keep as well, accompanied by Margaery. The city was left to grapple with the aftermath. A partially burned Great September, a decimated faith militant, and the knowledge that a second mad king-style destruction had only narrowly been averted. Tensions ran high. Rumors spread. Some said Margaery Tyrell had saved them all. Others said she had triggered the conflict. But the people had seen the barrels of wildfire, and they had seen Cersei's men try to keep them hidden. Most concluded that had Margaery not intervened, the Queen Mother might have used the green flame. Days turned into weeks. Under King Tommen's rule, the faith's influence receded sharply without the High Sparrow or his militant zealots. A new High Septon was chosen, more moderate, eager to move past the bloodshed. The city began rebuilding the Great September, or at least removing the damaged portions. Smoke still rose from the blackened husk of the once grand interior. Many had died, including devout worshippers, small folk, and members of the faith. Public funerals took place, sorrowful processions that Margaery attended in subdued mourning garments. She wept for the innocent lost and prayed that King's Landing would know peace. Meanwhile, Cersei was gone. Kevan Lannister and an escort had departed for the west, bearing the fallen queen out of the capital. The remaining Lannister loyalists in King's Landing found themselves caught in a precarious position. Some tried to pledge full allegiance to Tommen and Margaery. Others whispered that Cersei might yet return, that she would not forgive this humiliation. But for now, at least, her wildfire threat had been extinguished. Even if caches still existed in the city's hidden vaults, the king's men, heavily supervised by House Tyrell, were systematically locating and removing them, ensuring no one could repeat this near catastrophe. One afternoon, Margaery walked with Olenna Tyrell through the Red Keep gardens, where a new hush had fallen since the crisis. The older lady had returned after news of the September sneer destruction, and she wasted no time in reasserting House Tyrell's presence in court. The cloying scent of late summer flowers hung in the air as they strolled, accompanied by only a single handmaid. Margaery leaned on her grandmother's arm, needing the support as her thoughts roiled. "How is the king?" Olenna asked, glancing at Margaery's tired face. Margaery sighed, shaken, heartbroken. He banished his mother, but he loves her still. He's only a boy. He hardly knows how to handle such betrayal. Olenna patted Margaery's hand with surprising gentleness. "You must comfort him as best you can. Show him you are his ally, that House Tyrell will stand by him. With Cersei gone, you have the opportunity to truly guide him." Margaery gazed at a cluster of rose bushes, their petals drooping in the heat. "I will do my best. I wish it had not cost so many lives. The city will not soon forget the horrors in the September." Her grandmother's face hardened with a pragmatic edge. Better that than seeing the entire city engulfed in green flames. She paused, lowering her voice. "You saved King's Landing, my dear. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Without your cleverness, we might all be ashes." Margaery gave a weary nod, though she didn't feel particularly victorious. "Now we must ensure stability. The small council is in disarray. The faith is reeling. The people are frightened." Olenna looked at her with keen eyes. "Then comfort them, show them a queen they can believe in. You know how to do it. Distribute bread and supplies, sponsor rebuilding efforts. We Tyrells have resources from the Reach. Use them to your advantage." Margaery mustered a small smile. She recalled her days of distributing bread in Flea Bottom, winning the small folks' hearts. This time, she would do so not as a mere facade for popularity, but as an earnest attempt to mend a wounded city. "Yes," she said softly, "that is precisely what I shall do." In the days and weeks that followed, Margaery worked tirelessly. She convinced King Tommen to organize relief efforts for the victims of the September fire, to ensure the families of the fallen were compensated. House Tyrell provided grain shipments to help feed the hungry as the city recovered from the chaos. Margaery visited the ruined September each morning, kneeling in prayer for the souls lost. The new High Septon recognized her dedication, publicly praising her for saving the city from a far greater calamity. Gradually, the rumors began to shift in her favor. The small folk saw her as the queen who exposed the Wildfire plot and averted a massacre. Even the aristocracy, once dismissive of House Tyrell as upstarts, grudgingly admitted that Margaery had played a pivotal role. Through all of this, Tommen depended on her counsel. His grief over his mother weighed heavily, but Margaery offered constant reassurance. She did not speak ill of Cersei in his presence. She tried to show compassion for his pain, though she privately believed Cersei had sealed her own fate. Under Margaery's influence, Tommen reigned in the more zealous aspects of the faith's power, clarifying laws to ensure that what had happened before, trial by humiliation, arrests without cause, would not occur again. He also ensured that the City Watch patrolled regularly, discouraging any resurgence of Lannister or faith-led violence. A fragile peace settled over King's Landing. Of course, not all was calm in Westeros. Ravens flew to and from the capital, bearing news of threats beyond the city. The brewing conflict in the north, the maneuvers of Daenerys Targaryen overseas, the uncertain loyalties of the Riverlands. Margaery knew that any day might bring fresh chaos, but she vowed never again to let a threat simmer unseen beneath her feet as the Wildfire had. She would expose dangers early, build alliances, and keep King Tommen safe. That was her purpose now. Late one evening, Margaery retreated to her bedchamber, drained from the endless tasks of queenship. She stood at the mirror, unpinning her hair. The flicker of candlelight revealed dark circles under her eyes. She thought she was alone, but then a slight movement in the corner made her start. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, a lithe, nondescript man with graying hair. Varys. She recognized him at once, though his approach had been utterly silent. "Apologies for startling you, Your Grace," he said smoothly, bowing his head. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her racing pulse. "Lord Varys, I didn't hear you come in." He smiled, though as always, his smile never quite reached his eyes. "That is my trade, I'm afraid. I come with information I believe you may wish to hear." Margaery composed herself, turning fully to him. She had heard rumors that Varys had returned to King's Landing after traveling abroad, that he once again served as Master of Whisperers, albeit quietly, behind the scenes. "Go on," she said. He tilted his head. "I've had little birds in Casterly Rock. Word is that Cersei Lannister burns with bitterness at her banishment. She rails at Kevin, refuses to speak with Jaime, who is off on another campaign, and she dreams of vengeance. For now, she is contained, yes, but I suspect it will not remain so forever." Pang of worry struck Margaery. She thought of Tommen, of how much it would hurt him if Cersei came roaring back to try and reclaim her power. "She would do anything to regain her position," she murmured. "Indeed," Varys said softly. "However, she lacks the allies or resources to mount a direct challenge at present. Kevin does not appear eager to help her. He has new responsibilities in the West, and after the Wildfire fiasco, House Lannister's name is quite tarnished. Tread carefully, though wounded lions can still bite." Margaery nodded, her mind already racing through contingencies. "Thank you for telling me, Lord Varys. I appreciate your vigilance." He gave a measured bow. "I serve the realm, Your Grace, and I believe you have proven yourself quite an asset to the realm's stability." With that, he withdrew back into the shadows, disappearing as quietly as he had come. Left alone, Margaery turned back to her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman changed by these tumultuous events, no longer the bright, carefree maiden who had once graced King's Landing with flowers in her hair and an endless supply of smiles. Now her eyes held a deeper resolve, born of seeing how close the city had come to a cataclysmic fate. But she was still Margaery Tyrell, cunning, compassionate when needed, steeled by her grandmother's teachings. She would guide the king to rule wisely. She would keep watch for dangers lurking in the shadows. Above all, she would not let Cersei Lannister's lust for power consume King's Landing. The capital had been spared a green apocalypse this time. It would not come so close to disaster again, if Margaery had anything to say about it. At last, she slipped out of her gown, climbed into bed, and closed her eyes. Sleep would come for her eventually. She prayed that her dreams would no longer be haunted by visions of emerald flames. Yet if they were, she would remind herself that she had faced that threat and conquered it. The city still stood. The people still had a future. And Margaery Tyrell, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, had earned a measure of peace in the knowledge that she had, for once, bested Cersei Lannister and saved thousands of innocent souls from the wrath of Wildfire. When morning came, King's Landing would wake to a new day, a day shaped by Margaery's actions. She would walk among the people, share their sorrows, and help them rebuild. She would stand at Tommen's side, guiding him away from shadows and illusions. She would ensure that justice and mercy, rather than fear and fanaticism, reigned. And if the specter of Wildfire ever threatened again, she would be ready, for she had learned that secrets, left to fester, could turn a city to ash. But exposed in the clear light of truth, they could be diffused. She took comfort in that, and in the faint hope that, through diligence and compassion, the realm might finally move toward the peace that so many had died to achieve. Tonight, at least, King's Landing would remain unburned, and that was something precious indeed. The dawn's first rays found Margaery Tyrell still resting fitfully, but with a quiet sense of triumph that, after all the treachery and strife, the city still stood, thanks to the Rose of Highgarden who had dared to expose Wildfire and stand against the Lioness, saving them all. At dawn, Margaery rose from her bed with stiff limbs and a fog of fatigue weighing on her mind. She had slept only in fleeting bursts, disturbed by the memory of flames licking the walls of the Great September and the sound of screams echoing in the stone corridors. But as the first pale light of morning filtered through the chamber windows, she forced herself to stand. She wrapped a simple robe around her, pulled her hair back, and steeled herself for another day of quelling fear and mending the fractures in King's Landing. The city, still stunned by the recent upheaval, lay hushed beneath the lavender sky. Through the window, she could see columns of smoke tapering off, the last remnants of the September fire having died away during the night. Even from here, the charred dome and scorched towers were visible. Crews of workers, a mix of small folk volunteers, carpenters, and city watch, had labored through the darkness to keep the blaze contained. Now only the husk of the grand building remained, blackened stones and ash-laden pews that would be cleared slowly over many weeks. She summoned a pair of maids, instructing them to ready her bath. Though Margaery ordinarily took care to preserve her queenly poise at all times, she felt especially keen on washing away the sweat and soot that had clung to her skin since last night. While they prepared the bathwater, she studied her reflection in a polished metal mirror propped on a nearby stand. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes ringed by shadows. She thought she resembled a statue, composed but carved from some cold white stone. The experience of nearly perishing in the September had aged her, or so she felt. She ran a fingertip beneath one eye, a faint tremor in her touch. Then she dropped her hand, turning away from the mirror with a sigh. In the bath, steam rose around her, carrying faint scents of lavender oil. She let the warmth seep into her bones. There was little room for lingering. The day would be busy. Meetings with the Master of Coin, with the new High Septon, a gathering of lesser lords who had arrived to pledge support to King Tommen or to see the aftermath of the conflagration. The realm had smelled blood in the water. They would be curious to find out where real power lay now, with the king and his Tyrell queen, or with the remnants of House Lannister, or perhaps even with the battered faith. Everyone wanted answers. Her thoughts turned to Tommen. He had been inconsolable the previous night, after banishing his own mother from the city under guard. She had comforted him as best she could, reminding him that he had shown mercy by sparing Cersei's life, an act that proved he was not cruel, but neither was he weak. She reminded him that as king, he needed to balance justice with compassion. But it was a terrible burden to place on a boy of his age. At times, she found herself wishing Tommen were older, more experienced, more cynical even, if only so that the weight of these crises would not bruise him so deeply. Yet she could not change who he was. Instead, she would do her utmost to shield him from the worst. At last, she rose from the bath, toweled herself off, and allowed her maids to dress her in a gown of deep burgundy. Though the faith once demanded high necklines and subdued colors, that immediate threat had receded with the death of the High Sparrow. Now, Margaery could choose attire more reminiscent of her personal taste. Still modest, for the sake of courtesy in a city that had just survived a religious war, but with a bit more warmth and elegance than before. The burgundy's rich hue felt appropriate, regal, serious, and tinged with the sort of gravity that befitted the times. She left her chambers and made her way through the Red Keep's corridors. The halls felt strangely hushed, as though the palace itself was holding its breath. Guards stood at intervals, fewer than before but more alert, and many wore the golden rose sigil of House Tyrell upon their surcoats alongside the royal lion of House Lannister. The watchers bowed as she passed, though she saw the questions in their eyes. Margaery Tyrell, the queen who had exposed the Wildfire plot. Some believed her a savior, others blamed her for the violence that erupted. She had no time to dwell on rumors now. There was too much to do. Her first stop was Tommen's private solar. A pair of Kingsguard flanked the door. One was a knight from the Stormlands, the other a Westerlands man whose loyalties had once been squarely with the Lannisters. Both dipped their heads in respectful greeting. Margaery gently knocked, then slipped inside. She found Tommen seated at a small table where a simple breakfast of bread, cheese, and fruit had been laid out. He had barely touched it. His face was drawn, eyes rimmed red. It broke Margaery's heart to see him that way. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "I came to see how you fare." He looked up, tried to manage a wan smile. "I'm well enough," he answered, though the tremor in his voice told the truth. "I didn't sleep. I kept dreaming of the fire." She moved closer, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It will take time to heal from an ordeal like that. Nightmares are normal." She poured a small cup of watered wine and pressed it to his hand. "Perhaps this will help." He sipped, nodding reluctantly. "Thank you." A moment passed in silence before he spoke again. "I keep thinking, maybe I was too harsh with Mother, sending her away like that. She looked so furious, but also so lost. She's all alone at Casterly Rock." Margaery knelt by his chair, bringing herself to eye level. "Your Grace, you did what was necessary. You spared her life, which was merciful. If you'd done nothing, more blood would have been spilled. By her, by the faith, by the city. She made her choices. She threatened everyone with Wildfire. You had to act." He winced as if her words were daggers. I know. I just wish she had never done any of it." A tear slipped down his cheek. She brushed it away gently. "I wish that too," she whispered, meaning it. Then she rose, moving to the table's edge. "I don't expect you to forget she's your mother, but the realm must come first now. There are tasks waiting for you today. Small council meetings, judgments to pass. Will you attend them?" She was careful to phrase it as a question, giving him the chance to choose. He considered her for a moment, as though searching her face for answers. Then he inhaled, trying to steel himself. "Yes, I'll attend. We should do what's best for the people. The city needs reassurance." Margaery nodded with relief. "Then let's face the day together, Your Grace." They left the solar, Tommen flanked by a pair of Kingsguard while Margaery walked at his side, her presence a stabilizing force. The small council gathered in the Tower of the Hand, a chamber still partially under renovation after the chaos of the past few years. Grand Maester Pycelle looked half asleep already at the table's head. Next to him sat Lord Kevin Lannister, who had returned from his somber duty of overseeing Cersei's departure. A handful of other lords were present, among them Margaery's father, Mace Tyrell, wearing gilded plate that stretched uncomfortably over his bulk. The master of coin was a careful man from the Vale, Cersei, brought in after Littlefinger's departure. Varys was notably absent, though Margaery suspected he would appear when it suited him. As soon as Tommen took the seat at the head of the table, Kevan Lannister rose. "Your Grace," he said, bowing with genuine respect. "I have seen your mother off to Casterly Rock as ordered. She departed at dawn with a small escort of loyal men. I regret that matters have come to this, but I trust you did what you felt was right." Tommen nodded, expression still pained. "Thank you, Uncle." Kevan then looked around the table. "We have much to discuss. First, the city. The great September of Baelor stands partially ruined. The new High Septon has petitioned for crown assistance in rebuilding or at least in clearing the rubble. The faith militant, well, what remains of them, has effectively disbanded, lacking leadership and popular support. Many have either fled or renounced their vows. Our short-term goal must be restoring some semblance of public worship and ensuring a new place for holy gatherings, if the September is unusable. Lord Mace Tyrell spoke next. House Tyrell stands ready to provide laborers and supplies for the reconstruction, or to build a smaller sept in the meantime, if that proves more practical. We have stonemasons in Highgarden who could assist. Tommen cleared his throat, trying to muster authority. "That is generous, my Lord Tyrell. I think the people would appreciate seeing swift action. Let us do that. Grand Maester Pycelle, please send a raven to the new High Septon and assure him of our intention to help." Pycelle stirred from his half-doze, making an elaborate show of writing a note to himself. Margaery watched the old man's quill scratching on parchment. Next, Kevan looked at her. "Your Grace, the small folk have taken well to the relief efforts you began. Distribution of bread and supplies has helped quell the tension. Some are still upset by the faith's downfall and want explanation. Perhaps you could speak to the crowd personally. Reassure them the Seven are not forsaken. Merely that we've cast out fanaticism." Margaery inclined her head. "I will do so, Lord Kevan. A public address might be prudent to clarify the Crown's stance. That we do not oppose the faith itself, only the violent methods that led to bloodshed." Kevan nodded, apparently relieved. "Excellent. Let it be arranged." Talk turned to the question of finances. Rebuilding the September, continuing B. Reed lines, reinforcing the city watch, these would cost money. Cersei, the master of coin, furrowed his brow. The royal treasury still recovers from the debts incurred under the previous reigns, and the Iron Bank of Bravos grows impatient. We have not sent them interest payments in several moons. We must tread carefully. Without new funds coming in, we risk default. Margaery noted how Tommen tensed, looking uncertain. She offered, "House Tyrell can contribute partial funds toward the reconstruction and relief efforts in the short term. We have resources from the Reach's bountiful harvest. That should keep the city stable while we negotiate new terms with the Iron Bank." Tommen glanced at her, grateful. "Thank you, my queen. That might be the best course. Cersei, see to it. We will repay House Tyrell when we're in a stronger position." "Yes, your Grace," Cersei said, scribbling figures on a wax tablet. Margaery did not miss the flicker of relief in his eyes. An immediate crisis averted. The council addressed a few more matters. Rumors of Ironborn reavers harassing parts of the Reach's coastline, sightings of Sellsword companies traveling through the Stormlands, refugees streaming south from the Riverlands as the region still reeled from past wars. Finally, as the morning wore on, Tommen declared the meeting adjourned. He seemed exhausted, sagging in his seat, yet determined not to appear weak. Margaery felt a pang of sympathy. This was only the beginning, and it was already wearing him down. They exited the council chambers into a courtyard bright with mid-morning sunlight. There, Margaery caught sight of her grandmother, Olenna Tyrell, who had arrived in King's Landing several days after the Wildfire plot had been foiled. The Queen of Thorns was conferring with a pair of minor Reach lords at the far end of the courtyard, but as soon as she saw Margaery, she dismissed them. She moved with surprising alacrity for a woman of her age, her cane tapping lightly on the cobblestones. Margaery discreetly suggested to Tommen that he speak with Lord Kevin a moment longer. Then she broke off to meet Olenna halfway. "How goes it, child?" Olenna asked without preamble. Margaery glanced around, making sure no prying ears were too close. "The small council is managing. We're pouring resources into the city to keep people fed. And Cersei is gone. The king banished her to Casterly Rock. We'll have calm for a while, I hope." Olenna snorted. "Calm? In King's Landing? That's a myth, dear." She studied Margaery with shrewd eyes. "You look half dead. You should rest." Margaery gave a weary smile. "There's no time. We must keep the momentum. The city still trembles from the near catastrophe. If I can steady people's nerves, the crown gains legitimacy. If we hesitate, fear and rumor will fill the void." Olenna patted Margaery's hand. "True enough. I've just heard from my informants that some of the local Septons are outraged at the damage done to their spiritual center. Outraged at everyone, you understand, not just at Cersei. They blame the Tyrells for intervening so strongly. They blame you for inciting a confrontation." Margaery exhaled, though she was not surprised. "I'll address that in my speech. I'll explain that we only exposed Cersei's plan to burn the city. The violence, the fire. None of that was what I wanted." Olenna nodded. "Good. Do so soon and do it well. Focus on offering them hope for rebuilding, for a peaceful worship. Let them see you're no usurper of the faith." Margaery agreed. "I will. I've arranged a gathering in the square outside the September for tomorrow at noon. We'll bring whatever food remains in our stores to distribute. The new High Septon will stand beside me, if possible, to show unity." A wry smile curved Olenna's lips. "Your philanthropic gestures may cost us a fortune, but the goodwill is worth it. Fine. I'll be there to watch you dazzle them. Just remember, if any of the poor devils blame us for the faith's downfall, you must calm them quickly. We can't afford fresh riots." "I understand, grandmother." Olenna's gaze flicked to Tommen across the courtyard. "And how is the boy king? His spirit looks battered." Margaery nodded sadly. "He's mourning his mother's downfall, feeling guilty about the casualties. I'm trying to keep him from despair." Olenna pursed her lips. "If he cracks, the realm cracks. Do what you must. Remind him that the living outnumber the dead, that he made the right choice. Reinforce his sense of justice. You've always been skilled at soothing hearts, Margaery. Use that skill now more than ever." They walked together toward Tommen, who was just finishing a subdued conversation with Kevin. The older Lannister bowed politely to Olenna, then took his leave. Tommen managed a small greeting to the Queen of Thorns, which she returned with formal courtesy. Though Olenna was not known for warm sentiments toward the Lannisters, Kevin was a more measured man, and that made him easier for her to tolerate. "Come," Margaery said gently to Tommen. "Shall we walk in the gardens before you return to your chambers? Some fresh air may help." He nodded, looking grateful for any semblance of calm. Olenna excused herself to attend other matters, so Margaery and the king proceeded through the castle corridors and out into the gardens. A modest place in the Red Keep, with a few winding paths, a fountain, and a scattering of late-blooming flowers. The riotous color that once filled it had faded as autumn approached, but a certain tranquil beauty remained. They strolled slowly, Tommen's expression troubled. Margaery let the silence sit for a moment. She knew sometimes the weight of everything felt too huge for words. When they came upon a small stone bench near the fountain, Tommen sank onto it. She sat beside him, placing a supportive hand on his arm. "I killed them," Tommen said suddenly, his voice shaking. "All those men in the September, the faith militant, my mother's guards. If I hadn't summoned Mother there, hadn't insisted she come, maybe the fight wouldn't have started. Maybe." Margaery squeezed his arm, cutting him off gently. "Your Grace, that confrontation might have been inevitable. Cersei brought Ser Robert Strong, that monstrous knight, to kill anyone who stood in her way. The faith was determined to arrest or judge her. No matter where or how they met, blood was likely to be spilled." He pressed his lips together, tears gathering in his eyes. I just keep seeing flames. I wanted to be a good king like I promised the seven. Instead, I feel like I'm floundering in a nightmare. Margaery reached up, brushing a strand of his hair aside. Many good kings throughout history faced nightmares, Tommen. Ruling isn't easy, but it's not the nightmares that define you. It's how you respond to them. You banished your mother, yes, but you spared her life. You funded relief for the poor. You've listened to your counsel. That is a start. He blinked rapidly, looking at the fountain's rippling surface. Thank you, he murmured. Then, mustering a shaky smile, he turned to her. I want to be stronger. I don't want to be that frightened boy anymore. She smiled softly back. Then we'll work on that together. A moment later, she changed the subject, hoping to ease him away from the darkest thoughts. Shall we feed the koi fish? They always used to calm you. His face brightened slightly. Yes, let's do that. She rose, fetching a small pouch of fish feed kept in the garden's alcove. They sprinkled it into the fountain, watching the colorful fish dart up to nibble the floating morsels. In the stillness of the garden, it was easy to pretend for a moment that the kingdom was at peace, that Tommen was just a boy enjoying a quiet pastime with his friend. But Margaery knew better. The real world waited just outside the gates, waiting to test them again. By midday, she accompanied Tommen back inside, ensuring he took his meal and spent some hours reading the various petitions that had come in from lords across the realm. Then she left him in the capable, if somewhat fussy hands of Maester Pycelle and made her way to a private meeting with the new High Septon. He had been hastily elected by the surviving members of the clergy after the previous one. The High Sparrow perished in the conflagration. This new man, Septon Reynard, was older, heavy-set, and not nearly as radical as his predecessor. He had requested an audience with the Queen to discuss the future of the faith in King's Landing. They met in a repurposed hall near the Red Keep's Sept, since the main Great September was unusable. The chamber was modest, with plain walls and a single table. 2 robed attendants stood at either side of Septon Reynard. The man himself rose, bowing deeply to Margaery. Your Grace, thank you for coming. She inclined her head, taking a seat opposite him. Thank you for requesting me. I welcome your thoughts. His expression was somber. We face a great loss with the destruction of Baelor's September. While the structure still stands in part, the interior is ruined, and hundreds of faithful died in the blaze. The small folk are confused, fearful. Rumors abound that the gods have turned their backs on us. Margaery folded her hands in front of her. I am truly sorry for the lives lost. The crown will do everything in its power to help rebuild, to honor the memory of the faithful who perished. Reynard nodded slowly. I am grateful, my queen, but the faith also needs leadership. The faith militant rose under my predecessor, but now they have scattered. The small folk do not know whom to trust. They hear that the crown fought with the faith. They say the queen and the king conspired with the Tyrells to eradicate the sparrows. That accusation struck close to what Olenna had warned her about. Margaery held her composure. The crown did not want bloodshed or to destroy the faith, Septon Reynard. We only exposed a plot by Queen Mother Cersei to use wildfire upon the city. The confrontation that followed, that was tragic. It was never our intention to wage war in the holy place. I nearly died in those flames myself. The Septon's heavy features relaxed a fraction. I have heard the rumors. If the Queen Mother truly intended to burn us all, the sin is unimaginable. Yet many innocents died with her men. I hope the Seven will forgive all the confusion that led to so much carnage. They will, Margaery said gently. If we strive to do better, let us rebuild a faith that is humble and devout, but not militant or vengeful. King Tommen wishes to see the city at peace. He has no desire to crush the faith. He only wants to prevent violence, so we cannot allow armed zealots to roam the streets again. Reynard pressed his lips together. Yes, I have no wish to see men in robes wielding cudgels in the name of the gods. That was the vision of the late High Sparrow. I believe the faith must return to guiding souls, not punishing them with force. However, I also believe the crown must allow the faith its rightful independence, so that lords and ladies do not treat the clergy as mere puppets. Margaery nodded. We can find a balance. The crown will respect the faith's autonomy in matters of worship and spiritual guidance, and the faith will refrain from taking up arms or meddling in purely secular justice. If the faith believes a noble has committed crimes, you will present the evidence to the king or the courts, and they will handle punishment. Reynard's bushy eyebrows lifted. That seems reasonable. If it had been so before, perhaps none of this horror would have happened. Yes, Margaery said, her tone tinged with regret. We must learn from past mistakes. Let's formalize these terms in a new concord. The king will sign it, and if you put your seal upon it, the people will see that crown and faith stand united, peacefully. Reynard inclined his head. I would be honored to craft such a document with you. Thank you, Your Grace. They spoke a while longer, discussing the details. By the end, Margaery felt a cautious optimism that they might, indeed, chart a new path for the faith. Sept and Reynard lacked the fervent zeal of the High Sparrow, but that was precisely what the city needed now, someone stable and moderate. They planned that she and Reynard would stand together in the public square tomorrow, offering words of comfort. That, combined with an official statement promising reconstruction, would hopefully soothe many frightened hearts. By the time the meeting concluded, afternoon light was slanting through the narrow windows. Margaery took her leave, stepping back into the corridors of the Red Keep. She had a quick meal of fruit and fresh bread carried along with her as she went. Every hour seemed to present another challenge, another request for the Queen's attention. A steward approached, telling her that a group of minor lords from the Crownlands sought audience. She directed them to speak with Kevin Lannister first, as she needed a moment to gather herself for her next task. Making her way upstairs, she entered a small solar that overlooked Blackwater Bay. The breeze through the windows carried a tang of salt and distant fish markets. A subtle hush fell over the chamber. Here, she found her father, Mace Tyrell, pacing restlessly. When he saw her, he paused, puffing out his chest with a mixture of pride and exasperation. "Daughter," he said, half an admonition. "I've hardly seen you all day. Are you wearing yourself thin with these endless tasks?" She sighed, offering a weak smile. "Likely so, father, but it must be done." He nodded, scratching at his thick mustache. "You do well enough, though if you faint from exhaustion, that won't help either." Then, with a shift of subject, he said, "Our soldiers in the city want to know how long they will remain. We brought a sizable force to keep you safe from the Faith militant, but now that threat is gone. Do you wish them to stay or return to the Reach?" Margaery considered carefully. "We still need a decent Tyrell presence in King's Landing to uphold the King's rule. The City Watch is loyal for now, but we can't be certain of every corner. I don't want an occupying army, however. The people might resent that. Let's keep a moderate contingent, well-disciplined men who can be posted discreetly. The rest can return home to harvest or to guard against the Ironborn raids." Mace brightened as if impressed by her reasoning. "Very wise. I'll arrange it. And, daughter, a word of caution." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Our spies say Cersei's departure was not entirely placid. She cursed our name, cursed the King's name. We cannot be sure of her next move. For now, she's under Kevin's watch, but I can't shake the feeling that she'll try something more. She might even attempt to contact old Lannister loyalists or cause unrest from afar." Margaery pressed her lips into a tight line. "She may well. We must be vigilant. For Tommen's sake, we can't let her undermine him. If we keep the city stable, the people's loyalty will remain with the crown. Even if Cersei tries to spin some tale, it will have less effect if our rule here is strong." Her father grunted in agreement. "So be it. I'll see that we remain alert." As they spoke, a short steward in House Tyrell livery approached and bowed. "My lord, my lady, there's a messenger from Lannisport awaiting you in the outer hall. He says it's urgent news regarding the Queen Mother's escort." Margaery felt her stomach tighten. Already, she exchanged a glance with her father. "Show him in," she said. The steward nodded and withdrew. A moment later, a dusty rider with sun-reddened cheeks entered. He bowed quickly, looking flustered. "My Lady Queen, Lord Tyrell. I come from the road west, near Casterly Rock. I rode fast at Lord Kevin Lannister's behest to deliver this dispatch." He extended a sealed letter. Margaery took it, examining the wax seal, a golden lion's head. She opened the letter and read quickly, her eyes scanning the carefully penned lines. The messenger shifted from foot to foot, evidently anxious. When Margaery reached the end, she released a soft breath. Her father hovered, trying to read her expression. "Well?" he asked. Margaery handed him the letter. "Lord Kevin writes that the journey with Cersei was tense. She nearly fled their camp one night but was caught before she could slip away. She threatened to kill herself rather than be locked up in Casterly Rock. Kevin managed to calm her for the time being, but he warns that she is volatile, prone to violent outbursts. He says he will uphold the king's order, but he advises caution. She's made multiple attempts to send ravens to old family allies, presumably rallying them. Kevin has restricted her communication." Mace read it, frowning deeply. "She's caged, but that means she'll claw at the bars. The question is, who out there would heed her calls? Tywin's old bannermen? Or perhaps the Freys?" Margaery closed her eyes a moment, the mention of the Freys stirring dark memories. "We can't control who she contacts, short of complete isolation, which Kevin seems unwilling to impose. We'll just have to watch for any sign that she's raising support. If she tries to incite rebellion, Tommen can declare her an enemy of the crown." Even as she said the words, she felt a pang for Tommen. She knew that moment would devastate him. Mace nodded, handing the letter back. "We'll keep an ear to the ground here. Better that she's in the west than in the capital. That we can at least count as a mercy." Margaery thanked the messenger, who bowed again and left. Her father soon departed as well, on his way to meet with some Tyrell knights about troop redeployments. This left Margaery alone in the quiet solar, the letter still in her hand. She gazed at it, troubled by the knowledge that Cersei was already testing her bonds. The quiet that settled over the city felt fragile, easily shattered. A passing thought drifted through her mind. What if she had never exposed the wildfire? An even worse conflagration might have happened, possibly destroying the entire September with everyone inside. Tommen, the High Sparrow, even she herself might have perished. Yet the cost of revelation was still staggering. And Cersei, though banished, remained a worrisome shadow. Margaery set the letter on a side table, exhaling slowly, one burden at a time. The rest of the day passed in a swirl of activity. Lords from the Crownlands came to pledge renewed allegiance to Tommen, anxious to see if the city was stable. Some arrived with trifling disputes, one about grazing rights along the Rosby Road, another about a stolen cargo of barley. Margaery mediated a few of them herself, as Tommen was too drained to handle every detail. Her method was calm, empathetic, offering small concessions where needed. She made sure that each lord left with the impression that the queen took their concerns seriously. Subtle forms of gratitude went a long way in shaping a stable realm. Late in the evening, she dined with Tommen in private. The meal was subdued, though the food was excellent. Fresh fish from Blackwater Bay, roasted vegetables from the Crownlands. Margaery saw that Tommen ate enough to keep his strength up. They spoke quietly of the upcoming public address, how he should appear with her. He seemed nervous but willing. She assured him that the people needed to see the king out among them, safe and unafraid, so that they might feel safe themselves. Soon after, she left him to rest under the watchful eye of his Kingsguard. She herself longed for sleep, yet found her mind too wound up. She roamed the corridors of the Red Keep, eventually finding her way to a deserted balcony overlooking the bay. Cool air wrapped around her. Below, the lights of the city flickered, thousands of torches and lamps dotting the skyline. In the distance, she could see the dark shape of the Great September, the dome partially collapsed, ghostly in the moonlight. She had not expected that her life in King's Landing would come to this. a near brush with a city-destroying inferno, a shattered faith, and a banished queen mother. She recalled simpler days, back when she first arrived as Renly Baratheon's bride, full of optimism and ambition. Then again, maybe no day in King's Landing was truly simple. Everything here revolved around power, secrets, hidden agendas. A soft sound made her turn. Standing behind her, half in shadow, was Varys. He was dressed in his usual flowing robes, his hands folded. She smiled faintly, not startled, for she knew his footsteps were famously silent. "Lord Varys," she greeted him quietly. "Your Grace," he responded in his smooth, whispery tone, stepping forward onto the balcony. "I trust you're well?" She let out a breath. "As well as can be, given the circumstances. Can I presume your little birds bring tidings?" He offered a mild shrug. "They chirp in many corners. Some tidings are of more interest than others." She studied him. "Tell me what you've heard about Cersei. I received Kevin Lannister's letter about her attempts to slip away. Is there anything else?" His expression was measured, his voice gentle. "She's made contact, or attempted to, with certain bannermen in the Westerlands. Lords Kenning, Lefford, and Crakehall, to name a few. So far, the ravens she sent have been intercepted, or else the recipients offered polite but non-committal replies. Kevin's influence in the region is strong, and many are wary of siding against King Tommen. Still, if she persists, she may eventually find someone desperate or ambitious enough to heed her call." Margaery turned to gaze at the moonlit waters. "Then we must keep an eye on her. I wish it didn't have to be this way, but she left us no choice." Varys inclined his head. "Your compassion is commendable, yet this city needs your clear-eyed vigilance. The realm is not stable, no matter how it may appear. There are rumors of Daenerys Targaryen across the Narrow Sea, forging alliances. The north is unsettled, with many lords resenting the crown. And with Cersei Lannister relegated to Casterly Rock, some might see King Tommen as vulnerable. They may underestimate your strength." She set her hands on the balcony rail. "I know. Yet all we can do is fortify our position here. Prove that Tommen's rule brings justice and prosperity." Varys smiled faintly. "A wise course. And you, my queen, have a special talent for inspiring trust. If you succeed in uniting the people behind Tommen, the realm will not splinter further." She turned back to him, her eyes reflecting the glimmer of torchlight. "Thank you for your counsel. I appreciate your loyalty." He bowed, a subtle inclination. "I serve the realm, and I see in you the best chance for a lasting peace. Should you ever need my assistance, my little birds stand ready." Then, just as silently as he'd come, he slipped away, leaving Margaery alone once more. She lingered for a few moments longer, letting the wind stir her hair, letting the night air cool the tension in her body. Finally, she turned and walked back inside, resolved to find some hours of rest. Tomorrow would bring a new test. Her address in the public square, her efforts to stitch up the wounded city's faith. She would need all her wits about her. When morning came, the sunlight was warm but shy, blurred by drifting clouds. The smell of fresh bread and cooking pots rose through the streets of King's Landing. Margaery and Tommen departed the Red Keep in a modest procession, heading toward the square near the Great September. The king traveled in a carriage, the queen at his side, while a small escort of Kingsguard and Tyrell knights rode alongside. Onlookers lined the streets, curiosity and trepidation on their faces. The route passed crumbling tenements and half-burned shops that had suffered from the violence and panic of the faith's downfall. Now, carpenters and masons set about repairing them. Margaery peered out the carriage window, offering reassuring nods to the common folk who waved or bowed. She saw the mixture of awe and wariness in their eyes. So many had heard about the wildfire, about how the city nearly burned. Some considered her a savior, others still whispered rumors of treachery. She kept her expression serene, grateful for the presence of the Tyrell knights who handed out small bread loaves along the way. Children dashed forward eagerly, while mothers offered murmured thanks. At last, the carriage halted at the foot of the broad steps that once led into the Great September. Much of the building was barricaded with wooden scaffolds and cautionary ropes, the interior gutted by flame. The stone exterior still bore black streaks of soot. The wind stirred ash on the steps, ghostly traces of the conflagration. A large crowd filled the open square, kept in check by a line of city watch. Many eyes turned to watch the king's arrival. Tommen swallowed visibly as he emerged from the carriage. Margaery placed a comforting hand on his arm, guiding him forward. Sept and Reynard awaited them near a temporary wooden platform. He wore simple robes, his brow furrowed in grave solemnity. Nearby, a group of lesser septons and novices stood in formation, offering prayers under their breath. Before them, a hush settled over the crowd, as if expecting words of both hope and explanation. Margaery led Tommen onto the platform, flanked by Tyrell guards and Kingsguard. Once there, she stepped forward, raising a hand for silence. The sea of faces parted, revealing expressions of longing, anger, curiosity. Thousands of people stood packed together, some bearing injuries from the riot or bandages from the fire. She could practically feel their collective heartbeat pounding with unanswered questions. She began to speak, her voice clear but compassionate, carrying across the square. People of King's Landing, we stand on sacred ground that has been scarred by tragedy. Our great September, once a beacon of faith, lies burned and broken. Many among you lost friends, neighbors, loved ones. Many brave souls perished. We mourn them today. A ripple of grief passed through the crowd. Some bowed their heads, others wiped at tears. Margaery allowed the hush to hold a moment. Then she continued, "We also know that if not for the Seven's mercy and the brave intervention of many, we might have lost far more. A hidden cache of wildfire threatened this holy place, put here by those who cared more for vengeance than for life. Had that wildfire been unleashed, the destruction would have been absolute. King, court, and common folk alike, all burned without distinction." A murmur spread, some sounding fearful, others grim. She saw people exchanging glances, recalling rumors they had heard. One woman's cry cut through the noise. "We heard you saved us, Your Grace. Is that true?" That question stung Margaery's heart. She felt unworthy of claiming such a deed alone. She answered gently, "Many people saved us. Spies who brought word of the wildfire, faith militant who risked their lives to uncover it, my own retinue who helped remove the barrels. I only did my part to reveal the threat. But you, the people, deserve to know the truth, that we narrowly escaped a cataclysm that might have destroyed half the city." A hush, broken by the shuffle of feet and the occasional muffled sob. Margaery glanced at Tommen, who stood behind her, his face tense. She gave him a small nod, wordlessly encouraging him to step forward. He did so, voice wavering at first. I wish to express how sorry I am for the loss of life," he said. "I never wanted violence in this September. I love this place. As your king, I promise to help rebuild it. We will gather stonemasons, carpenters, and pious hearts from across the realm to restore a house of worship worthy of the Seven." A smattering of applause and cheers rose, though subdued. Hope flickered in the crowd's eyes. Tommen continued, "I also promise that never again will the crown permit such an evil plot to take root beneath our feet. There will be no more wildfire caches stored in secret, no more fanatic armies terrorizing the streets. The city belongs to you all, and the crown is here to protect it. We will stand beside the new High Septon, who is our guide in matters of faith, and we will work together for peace." Septon Reynard stepped up beside Tommen. He lifted his hands in a gesture of blessing. "The gods see into every heart. They saw the cruelty and fear that led us to this pass, and I pray they will guide us away from such darkness. Let us be gentle with one another now, band together in compassion. We will rebuild the great September, but we must also rebuild trust. The crown and the faith have often clashed, yet we need not be enemies. We can serve each other in humility." This time, a warmer response came from the crowd. Scattered nods, more subdued applause. The tension in the air seemed to ease a fraction. Margaery seized that momentum, speaking again. In honor of the lives lost, and to ensure no one goes hungry in this time of rebuilding, we have brought wagons of bread, fresh produce, and barrels of clean water. Please take what you need. We have also arranged for healers to tend to the injured and orphans from the tragedy. She gestured to where several wagons rumbled into the far side of the square, manned by Tyrell footmen and volunteers. The watchers parted, eyes lighting with relief at the sight of nourishment. Murmurs of "Seven bless the king," and "Long live the queen," trickled through the throng. Margaery felt a small glow of relief herself. The mood was shifting, the anger abating. Hope was stirring. As the crowd began to form lines for the food distribution, she could see the tension draining from Tommen's shoulders. One older man near the front of the platform called out, "And what of the Queen Mother? Where is she?" Silence followed his query, as if all awaited Margaery's answer. Tommen stiffened. Margaery moved in smoothly, her voice calm. "The Queen Mother has been removed from the capital for the time being. Though her guilt in these events must be weighed, King Tommen has shown her mercy. She will remain under guard away from King's Landing until such time as the realm's peace is assured." A few uncertain murmurs followed. Another voice asked, "Will she be punished for those she killed?" Margaery understood the anger beneath that question. Tommen looked to her with desperation in his eyes. She placed a steadying hand on his arm, then addressed the crowd firmly. "Justice must be tempered by prudence. We cannot bring back those lives lost, but we can prevent further violence. That is why the king has taken decisive steps to keep everyone safe. Rest assured, if any threat arises again, we will meet it swiftly." For a moment, the crowd seemed uncertain. But then an older woman near the wagons lifted a loaf of bread in thanks, calling, "Thank you, Your Grace." The positivity spread, and voices rose in acceptance. It was not a full-throated cheer. Too many had died or lost loved ones for that, but it was enough to indicate they had avoided an uproar. Margaery exhaled, grateful. With the speech done, Tommen stepped down from the platform. Margaery and Sept and Reynard guided him through the lines of people receiving bread, letting them see him up close. Some knelt, pressing their foreheads to the ground in reverence. Others simply dipped their heads or reached out tentatively to touch the king's hand. Margaery watched him muster a gentle smile, interacting with the small folk in a way that, she hoped, would remind them he was not just a figurehead. After a quarter hour of this, Sept and Reynard said a concluding prayer, the people bowed, and the small group from the keep began to withdraw. The city watch kept the crowd orderly so that chaos would not erupt over the free supplies. The atmosphere hummed with a cautious optimism. Margaery walked at Tommen's side, noticing that he stood a little straighter than he had earlier. Once they were back in the carriage, Tommen let out a shaky sigh. "That was better than I expected." Margaery smiled, resting a hand on his knee. "You spoke well, Your Grace. They saw your compassion. That's what they need." He managed a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for guiding me. He hesitated, eyes flicking to the window. "When the man asked about Mother, I thought I'd freeze up. But you were there." She squeezed his arm reassuringly. "We're in this together. We'll handle whatever comes." The carriage jolted into motion, heading back toward the Red Keep along the same route. The day was not over. More duties awaited them, but Margaery felt a renewed sense of determination. This first public step of reclaiming trust had gone well enough. If they continued to govern wisely, if Tommen gained confidence, if the city found peace, then perhaps the specter of Wildfire would recede into memory. Perhaps the realm could begin to heal from all the devastation inflicted upon it these past few years. Yet even as she let herself hope, she could not ignore the grim knowledge that war still brewed in other corners of Westeros. She knew that outside King's Landing, petty lords and great houses alike might see Tommen's youth as an opportunity to press their claims. She had heard faint whispers of the Targaryen girl in Esso's gathering strength, though no one in the Red Keep seemed certain how soon or if she might land in Westeros. The North was rumored to be in turmoil, with wild stories of White Walkers and the scattered remnants of Stannis Baratheon's forces. But for now, her horizon must focus on the capital. She had enough battles here, subtle ones of politics and alliances of hearts and minds. When the carriage arrived at the Red Keep's gates, the noon sun sat high, warming the ramparts. The party disembarked, and Margaery guided Tommen toward the Great Hall, where they planned a brief hearing of petitions. They passed a group of Tyrell knights in the courtyard, who saluted them. Margaery recognized one as her father's man, Ser Ryan, who had been among those who helped seize the Wildfire barrels. She nodded in gratitude to him, remembering how that act had likely saved them all. Inside the keep, the Great Hall was not as packed as on a typical court day, but a few petitioners waited, along with scribes. Tommen settled onto the Iron Throne, still an intimidating sight for him, and Margaery took a seat on a smaller throne to his right. The first petitioner was a wealthy merchant complaining of increased fees at the city gates. The second was a minor noble lady whose son had been wrongly accused of theft by the city watch. Margaery listened carefully, offering gentle questions to clarify the situation. Tommen tried to appear authoritative, though his voice sometimes wavered. Nevertheless, they managed to mete out what seemed fair solutions. Partway through, a messenger arrived from the gates to announce that Lord Bronn of the Blackwater had come seeking audience. Tommen looked startled, for Bronn was known as the Sellsword Knight who once served Tyrion Lannister and, more recently, had gained lands and a title. Margaery raised her eyebrows in mild curiosity. "Show him in," she said. Moments later, Bronn sauntered in, clad in practical leathers rather than grand finery. He gave a half bow, a crooked grin on his scarred face. "Your Graces," he said, voice casual. "Apologies if I'm interrupting your grand business." Tommen blinked. "Lord Bronn, you're welcome here. What brings you?" Bronn rested a hand on the hilt of his sword, which caused a small stir among the guards. He made no threatening move, merely leaning on it in an easy stance. "I've come to pay my respects and bring news from the Stormlands. I've been traveling a bit, collecting rents from some lesser holdings that were granted to me. On the road, I heard rumors of bandit attacks creeping closer to King's Landing. Thought you might want to know." Margaery listened intently. "Bandits? Where precisely?" Bronn shrugged. "They're holed up in the forests south of Rosby, or so I hear, harassing travelers, claiming to be remnants of some cause or another. Maybe a few are ex-soldiers from the War of the Five Kings, never found new purpose. They style themselves the Sparrow's Claw, a reference to the faith militant, I guess, though they're just outlaws from what I can tell." A ripple of concern went through Margaery. Another group seeking to use the faith's downfall for some petty rebellion? She glanced at Tommen, whose expression darkened. "That's troubling," he said. "We can't allow outlaws so close to the capital. I'll dispatch the City Watch to quell them." Bronn gave a short laugh. "City Watch might not be enough if these bandits have grown bold. A few knights wouldn't hurt. I can bring some men of my own, if you'd like to pay me for the trouble." Margaery suspected Bronn always angled for a coin or two, but perhaps in this instance, he was right about the watch needing help. She looked to Tommen, speaking softly. "We should coordinate with Lord Kevin or Lord Tyrell. Better to act swiftly before they become a larger threat." Tommen nodded, turning back to Bronn. "Thank you for the information, Lord Bronn. We'll see to it. Remain in the city a few days, if you can, and speak with Lord Kevin about how best to join forces." Bronn bowed again, smirking. "As you say, Your Grace, my thirst could use quenching at the local taverns, so I'll stay. Just send word when you want heads cracked." With that, he turned and strode out, leaving the impression of a cat who had just hinted at its willingness to pounce for a price. Margaery exhaled, meeting Tommen's eyes. "It seems we must watch for trouble from all sides." He frowned. "Yes, but hopefully it's nothing we can't handle." They finished the rest of the petitions without further surprises, then rose from the thrones, stiff and weary. Tommen's young face looked pinched with fatigue. Margaery gently nudged him to retire for a late lunch, which he accepted. She lingered in the hall, speaking with a few scribes to ensure they recorded the day's judgments correctly. It was almost mid-afternoon by the time she stepped out into the corridor, intent on rejoining Tommen. She was intercepted by one of her father's men, who informed her that a raven had arrived for her personally, bearing the sigil of House Tully. "House Tully," Margaery repeated, surprised. "Bring it to my solar at once." She made her way there, curiosity piqued. House Tully of Riverrun had fallen on hard times since the Red Wedding and the Frey ascendancy. Edmure Tully was rumored to be a prisoner of the Freys, while Brynden Blackfish Tully was in hiding. What message could they possibly be sending? When she reached her solar, the messenger handed her the rolled parchment. She noted no seal beyond the Tully fish stamped in red wax. Carefully, she broke it open and read. The letter was terse. "Your Grace, I write in desperation. My uncle, Brynden Tully, fights to retake Riverrun from the Freys. They hold my husband, Edmure, in their dungeons. The Riverlands bleed under their cruelty, and we have no allies strong enough to oppose them. I humbly implore King Tommen and his queen for assistance. Our houses were once aligned through marriage. Should you come to our aid, we will pledge loyalty to the crown anew." Signed, Rosalind Tully, née Frey. Margaery set the parchment down, mind racing. Rosalind Frey was the bride of Edmure Tully, forced into that match at the Red Wedding. She must have sided with her husband's family, an unusual twist for a Frey, or perhaps she sought any means to liberate him. Now they were begging the crown for help. If King Tommen extended a hand, it could bring the Tullys back under the crown's banner, but it would mean confronting the Freys, who were technically sworn to the Lannisters since the War of the Five Kings. Margaery felt a headache bloom at her temples. This was precisely the sort of complicated entanglement that could unravel the tenuous peace. The Freys were loathed throughout much of the realm for their treachery at the Red Wedding, but they had powerful allies, especially Walder Frey, who claimed close ties with the Lannisters. Now that Tywin Lannister was dead and Cersei was disgraced, perhaps Walder Frey's hold on the Riverlands was more precarious. But intervening might spark another conflict. Could Tommen afford that? She stared at the letter for a long moment, weighing the possible outcomes. If they ignored the plea, the Tully cause might wither, and the Freys would remain entrenched. Yet the crown would look heartless, ignoring the plight of once great House Tully. If they intervened, that risked open conflict with House Frey and might shatter the fragile alliance the Lannisters had with them, though that alliance was presumably weakened by Cersei's banishment. Her father, Mace, might see an advantage in humbling the Freys, given that House Tyrell had no love for Walder. But would Kevan Lannister oppose it? How would it affect stability near King's Landing if they raised an army to march to the Riverlands? And what if this was a trap, some cunning ploy? She decided to take the letter to Tommen, Kevan, and her father, present the facts, and see what counsel emerged. Whether or not they chose to help the Tullys, the choice would reverberate across the realm. Another war in the Riverlands was the last thing the capital needed right now, but leaving an entire region to suffer under Frey cruelty might foster resentment that would undermine Tommen's rule in the future. Setting her jaw, she left her solar and headed to find Tommen. He was in his private sitting room, finishing a late lunch of spiced chicken and wine. She asked the guards to allow her entry. Inside, the king brightened to see her, though his expression grew concerned when he saw her face. "What is it?" he asked. She handed him the letter. He read it, brow furrowing. "So the Tullys want our help against the Freys?" "Yes," she confirmed, sinking into a chair beside him. "That is the gist. If we assist them, we risk angering Walder Frey and possibly House Lannister's older ties. But if we ignore them, we lose the Tullys, and they might eventually align with someone else against us." He set the parchment aside, looking troubled. "I'd prefer not to start another war, but the Freys are hated. They slaughtered so many at the Red Wedding. Father told me about it once. And House Tully was once loyal to the crown." Margaery laid a reassuring hand on his. "We must weigh our options carefully. Perhaps we can negotiate with the Freys first, find some compromise that frees Edmure and keeps the Riverlands at peace." Tommen nodded slowly, relief flickering in his eyes. "Yes, negotiation first. If that fails, we'll reconsider. Summon Uncle Kevan and Lord Tyrell. I'd like their input." She rose. "At once, Your Grace. We'll meet in the small council chamber." He reached for her hand before she could go, his eyes earnest. "Thank you, Margaery. I'm leaning on you so much these days. I hope it's not too great a burden." She squeezed his hand gently. "It's a burden we share. You're not alone." His gaze shone with gratitude. She withdrew, her heart heavy with both affection for his gentle nature and concern for the realm's complexities. The wheel of power kept turning, and the capital had barely caught its breath from one crisis before another loomed. Still, this was the reality of kingship. She had saved King's Landing from Wildfire, but there were 1,000 other sparks across Westeros waiting to flare into an inferno if they did not tend them carefully. She arranged the small council meeting for late afternoon, sending notes to Kevan Lannister, Mace Tyrell, the Master of Coin, and any other relevant advisors. They gathered around the table again, the sunlight slanting in through the windows. Kevan read the letter with a grave expression. Mace scowled, arms folded across his broad chest. When Tommen explained his inclination to attempt negotiation first, Mace spoke up. "Walder Frey is a venomous old coot, but he's no fool. He'll either demand something outrageous to free Edmure Tully or claim that the Tullys started the unrest. We must show him that the Crown will not tolerate cruelty or indefinite hostilities in the Riverlands." Kevan Lannister pinched the bridge of his nose. "House Frey was a key ally to my brother Tywin during the War of the Five Kings. Their betrayal at the Red Wedding ended the Stark threat in the north. Now, with Tywin gone and Cersei absent, Walder's sense of loyalty might be shaky. If we threaten him, he could rebel outright. On the other hand, the Tullys' loyalty is also uncertain. Brynden Tully has no love for the Crown, and if we do not help them, they might ally with the Starks or some other rising force. Either path carries risk." Tommen listened, brow creased. Then he glanced at Margaery. "What do you think?" She met Kevan's eyes, then her father's, and finally spoke with quiet resolve. "I believe we should try a firm diplomatic approach. We send word to Walder Frey, telling him the Crown demands an end to hostilities in the Riverlands, the peaceful release of Edmure Tully, and a negotiated settlement. If he refuses or stalls, we threaten to revoke any royal protections or titles bestowed upon the Freys. That way we show we are serious, but we do not immediately resort to war." Mace nodded emphatically. "Yes, and if that old weasel tries to call our bluff, we'll gather an army. The Riverlords hate him. Some might rally to the Crown if we promise to restore Riverrun to the Tullys. A swift campaign might topple the Freys." Kevan's face was more guarded. "A campaign in the Riverlands would be bloody. Yet you're not wrong, Walder Frey is widely despised. The Tully name could help unify the region under Tommen. If we do it carefully, we might avoid a prolonged conflict." Tommen listened, then exhaled slowly. "Let's do it. We send a message to Walder Frey. Free Edmure, accept the Tully claim to Riverrun under the King's peace, or risk the Crown's wrath. Meanwhile, we'll gather men discreetly, so if he defies us, we can act. I don't want more bloodshed, but I won't let the Freys terrorize the Riverlands indefinitely." Margaery placed a supportive hand on Tommen's shoulder. She could feel tension vibrating through him, but also a steely determination she hadn't often seen. "We'll draft the letter at once," she said gently, "and we'll see how Walder Frey responds." With that decided, the small council concluded. Mace and Kevan departed to coordinate messages and potential musterings of troops. Tommen lingered at the table, shoulders sagging once they were gone. Margaery rubbed a hand over his back in silent support. "That felt strangely good," he confessed, though his voice was tinged with guilt. "Making a decision, a real one, not just a reaction. But it also feels terrifying." She smiled kindly. "That's what being a king often is, Tommen, making decisions that could change the fate of thousands. Terrifying, yes, but also necessary." He nodded. "I only hope I'm doing the right thing. We said we wanted peace, yet here we are, threatening war on the Freys." Margaery thought of the letter from Rosalind Tully, the pleas of the Riverlands. "Sometimes, to secure peace, we must show a willingness to fight if pressed. I believe you're handling it with caution and fairness. That is all anyone can ask." She helped him from his seat, and they walked together out of the council chamber. Late afternoon light cast long shadows in the corridors. The Iron Throne might have avoided the green flames of Wildfire, but the kingdom was still riddled with smaller fires. Margaery reminded herself that so long as she could stand beside Tommen, guiding him with both compassion and cunning, there was a chance to steer Westeros toward stability. The rest of the day was spent drafting the royal letter to Walder Frey, phrased with the careful diplomacy that only a queen's pen could shape, resolute but also giving him a path to compliance. She ended it with Tommen's grand signature and seal, ensuring no confusion of authority. That evening, as she returned to her chambers, Margaery found her grandmother awaiting her. Olenna was seated at a small table, sipping a cup of wine. When Margaery entered, Olenna glanced up, eyes glinting. "You look weary, child," Olenna greeted her, "but also determined. Have you had another idea for stirring the pot?" Margaery set aside her cloak, joining Olenna at the table. "We're sending an ultimatum to Walder Frey to free Edmure Tully and yield Riverrun. If he refuses, we may have to intervene." Olenna let out a short laugh. "Good. I detest the phrase. If we can rid the realm of that brood of traitors, so much the better." Margaery's lips twitched in a small smile. "We're trying to avoid open war, grandmother." Olenna shrugged. "And if war does happen, at least we'll be rid of them." She sipped her wine. "Oh, don't look at me like that. You know as well as I do, the Freys are vermin. The only question is whether we swat them now or later. I assume you're playing the moderate route, which is wise. But be prepared for the possibility that Walder Frey will not yield. He's a prideful wretch who's enjoyed Lannister favor for too long." Margaery tapped her finger on the tabletop, considering. "We have House Tyrell soldiers, and Kevin could muster Lannister forces if we need them. The question is whether Kevin truly wants to fight the Freys. But if Frey defiance is open, Kevin might have no choice." Olenna nodded, setting down her cup. "If you do march, do it swiftly and decisively. The River Lords will flock to your banners if you promise them liberation from Frey tyranny." Margaery's eyes flicked to the window, beyond which the night was darkening. "I just hope we don't have to march at all. Too many battles have been fought in that poor region." Olenna reached out, patting Margaery's hand. "You've done well, dear. You saved the city from a hideous demise and have your king's ear. You are forging alliances. Whatever awaits, you've proven you can handle it." Margaery squeezed her grandmother's hand gently. She appreciated the vote of confidence. As they sat there in quiet solidarity, she reflected on how quickly the realm had changed since the day she discovered Cersei's Wildfire plot. No one had been certain if King's Landing would even stand. Now, the city was stumbling toward a fragile peace, and Margaery's influence at Tommen's side had grown immeasurably. At length, she said goodnight to Olenna, retiring to her own chambers. The bed beckoned, and she let herself sink onto the mattress, a heavy weariness draping over her. Tomorrow, the Crown's letter would be sent to Walder Frey. Then she would continue her schedule of meeting with trade delegations, coordinating the Great September's partial rebuilding, and keeping watch on any sign of discontent. Before drifting into a fitful sleep, she repeated a quiet prayer in her mind. "Let the city know calm. Let Tommen find the strength of a true king. And let me have the wisdom to guide him without leading us all into ruin." The next morning arrived with a crisp breeze that hinted at the approach of autumn. Margaery rose early, her body aching for more rest, but her mind already churning. She dressed in a simple yet regal gown of pale green, an echo of her Tyrell heritage, then made her way to the courtyard where the letters to Walder Frey would be sent by Raven. Kevan Lannister and Mace Tyrell stood by, supervising the final wax seals. Tommen arrived soon after, escorted by a pair of Kingsguard, to place the official stamp of the crown on each letter. Several identical copies were made to prevent any lost ravens from spoiling the message. Tommen pressed the seal into the warm wax of the main letter. "There," he said softly, stepping back. "Ravens, fly. May the gods help us." Maester Pycelle oversaw the actual dispatch of the letters, instructing a flight of ravens to take off from the rookery. They disappeared into the pale sky, carrying the king's ultimatum across the miles to the twins, where Wildfire ruled with his brood. Margaery watched them go, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Now they would wait. Wait for Frey's reply, wait for any sign of acceptance or refusal. The city continued its own slow recovery, but the tension in the castle grew daily. Tommen performed his royal duties with more confidence, hearing disputes, ordering supplies for winter stores, reviewing the city watch. Margaery stood as his unwavering ally, offering counsel and quietly smoothing the edges of his inexperience. Within a fortnight, the great September's rubble had been partially cleared. Temporary wooden scaffolds stabilized what remained of the dome. Sept and Reynard led small prayers in a makeshift outdoor altar, drawing crowds who came to mourn or to find hope. The breadlines continued, financed largely by Tyrell gold. All the while, rumors swirled in the taverns and streets. Some rumored that Cersei Lannister had escaped from Kevin's watch. Others claimed she was raising an army in secret. A few whispered that Margaery was the true ruler, pulling Tommen's strings. Varys discreetly informed Margaery that no new men had come to Cersei's banner, at least none of consequence, but they must remain vigilant. When nights fell, Margaery still dreamt sometimes of green flame flickering over the rooftops. She would wake in a sweat, heart pounding. But each morning, the sun rose on a city that still stood. 3 weeks after the ravens flew, a reply arrived from the twins. It came in the form of a single letter, its edges somewhat rumpled, the seal of House Frey slapped atop it. The courier who delivered it to the Red Keep had galloped from the Riverlands without pause, or so he claimed, apparently eager to rid himself of the missive. Tommen, Margaery, Kevin, and Mace gathered in the small council chamber to open it. Outside, the wind howled, a sign that cooler weather was fast approaching. Tommen broke the seal, unfolded the parchment, and read aloud. To the boy king in King's Landing and his meddling courtiers, I receive your demands with disgust. You dare question the rightful rule of House Frey in the Riverlands? It was by Frey cunning that the Tullis fell, and by Frey generosity that Edmure Tully was spared from a traitor's death. If you presume to order me about, I remind you that House Frey paid for its loyalty to House Lannister with blood. If you wish to repay us with scorn, then you are no true son of the late Tywin, and no friend to the Freys. Edmure Tully remains my prisoner. Riverrun remains ours. If you attempt to steal it away, I shall see to it that the next wedding's guests are all Tyrells and Lannisters, and it shall be a wedding the realm will never forget. Walder Frey, Lord of the Crossing. A hush followed as Tommen let the parchment fall to the table. Margaery felt a spark of anger at the old man's brazen insolence, referencing the horrors of the Red Wedding with that ominous vow. Kevin's face darkened, while Mace's jaw clenched in contempt. That wretch, Mace muttered. He threatens another massacre. Tommen swallowed, looking between them. He's refused. He means to keep Edmure captive and ignore our command. Kevin Lannister inclined his head grimly. So it would seem. Margaery placed a hand on Tommen's arm. He's provoked us intentionally. He believes he can frighten us into abandoning the Tully cause, or that we're too weak to challenge him. Tommen's hands balled into fists. He's wrong. He's not going to kill Edmure Tully on my watch or terrorize the Riverlands. Uncle, how many men can we call upon if we must march? Kevin pressed his lips together. We can rally a decent number of Lannister bannermen, especially with Cersei out of the picture. They're more inclined to follow the king's direct command. Together with House Tyrell, your forces would be formidable. Mace Tyrell puffed out his chest. The Reach can supply a host if needed. The harvests have been strong. We can feed an army. Tommen nodded, a determined light in his eyes. Then let's do it. We'll free Edmure Tully and restore him to Riverrun. That region will come under the crown's peace. Walder Frey must learn he cannot disregard my rule. Margaery felt both pride and worry. War was never the ideal solution, but Walder Frey left them no choice. Perhaps a swift campaign would break his power. She found her voice. We should coordinate carefully, Your Grace. Seek alliances among the smaller river lords. The Blackfish is rumored to be resisting the Freys around Riverrun. He might welcome our intervention. Kevin raised an eyebrow. You suggest we join forces with Brynden Tully? Margaery nodded. Yes, if we pledge to restore Edmure Tully as Lord of Riverrun, the Blackfish might open his gates to us, sparing us a long siege. The Riverlands would quickly rally to a Tully banner backed by the crown. That would isolate Frey forces at the Twins. Tommen looked to Kevin, who considered, then inclined his head. A sound plan. We should send envoys at once to the Blackfish, or to whatever Tully loyalists remain. We must be cautious, though. The Freys hold the crossing at the Twins. They can hamper movement in the region. We might have to approach from the south, or secure a crossing near Seagard. Mace Tyrell's eyes gleamed. Once we get into the Riverlands, we can come upon them from behind. House Tyrell has the resources to handle the logistics. I'll call the banners. We'll have to do it swiftly, before winter sets in. A surge of activity followed. Kevin penned letters to the Lannister bannermen, Mace prepared to summon the Tyrell host, and Tommen wrote an official proclamation that Walder Frey was defying the Crown's order, inviting all loyal Riverlords to join in re-establishing peace. Margaery assisted, ensuring the language was carefully chosen to frame Frey as the aggressor and the Crown as the realm's protector. She also drafted a letter to be delivered to Brynden Tully, hoping to establish terms for cooperation. By the time night fell, the Red Keep buzzed with preparations for war. It would not be an all-consuming conflict like the War of the Five Kings. At least they hoped not. But it was a campaign nonetheless, one that would see the King's men marching west. Margaery wondered what the people of King's Landing would think, especially after their city had just emerged from the shadow of Wildfire. The last thing they desired was more fighting. Yet Walder Frey's threat could not go unanswered. In her bedchamber that evening, Margaery found herself unable to sleep again. She paced by the window, looking out over the moonlit harbor. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of the Great September, now ringed with scaffolds. A faint memory of green flame danced through her mind. Unbidden, she forced her thoughts elsewhere. War with the Freys could unify the realm behind Tommen if they were victorious. Alternatively, if it dragged on or ended in stalemate, it could undermine him. So much rode on the outcome. A soft knock. Kay came at the door. Margaery opened it to find one of her ladies, a dark-haired girl from the Reach named Elys. The girl looked anxious. Beg pardon, Your Grace, but Lord Varys sent a message. He said he thought you'd want to see him. He's waiting in the anteroom. Margaery nodded, immediately curious. Show him in. Elys departed, and moments later, Varys slipped into the chamber. He bowed. Apologies for disturbing your rest, my queen. Margaery gestured for him to rise. No apology needed. I suspect you have something urgent. He inclined his head. I do. My little birds have heard word that Cersei Lannister is furious at the news that the Crown is preparing to march on House Frey. Evidently, she's attempted to send ravens to Walder Frey, urging him to hold strong and not yield to her weak son. She claims Tommen is under the influence of you Tyrells, that the Lannisters should stand with the Freys. Kevin Lannister has intercepted her messages, but it shows her intention to stoke resistance to the Crown. Margaery's jaw tightened. So she seeks to sabotage Tommen's campaign from afar. Varys nodded solemnly. Precisely. So far, Kevin prevents her from contacting Walder directly, but she's cunning. She might find another way or another messenger. If she convinces Walder that the Lannisters secretly support him, or that Tommen is not truly a Lannister by blood, there's no telling what trouble she could stir. A chill ran through Margaery. She thought of how fiercely Cersei loathed her. She'll do anything to keep Tommen from forging alliances with the Tullys, or from relying on the Tyrells, for that matter. Yes? Varys whispered, folding his hands. I thought you should know. Kevin does what he can, but Cersei is dangerous, even caged. If Walder Frey believes he has a powerful ally at Casterly Rock, he might grow more defiant. Margaery pressed her lips together. Thank you. We'll be vigilant. Perhaps we can have Kevin further restrict her contact with the outside world, though I doubt he'd approve. He's not cruel, nor does he want to appear so. Varys's eyes were sympathetic. He underestimates her, but perhaps you will not. In any case, I wanted you to be informed. She offered him a weary smile. Your information is invaluable, as always. He bowed and slipped out, leaving Margaery to stare at the flickering candles. One more threat, one more snarl in the tapestry of intrigues. But she reminded herself, better to know Cersei's attempts than to be caught unawares. The illusions might be thick, but Margaery had learned to navigate them with cunning and composure. She dimmed the candles, at last lying down in her bed, willing her restless mind to find a few hours of sleep. The war drums had not yet begun to beat, but she could feel them all the same, echoing in the distance like a foreboding heartbeat of Westeros. She prayed the city would remain safe, that Tommen would emerge stronger rather than shattered. And above all, she prayed no new wildfire, literal or metaphorical, would consume the fragile peace they had built since that harrowing day when she exposed Cersei's plan and saved King's Landing from a fate of green flames. As the hours passed, she drifted into dreams. In them, she walked through the quiet streets of a rebuilt city, the great September restored to gleaming marble, the people smiling and singing praises to a benevolent king. But shadows lingered at the edges, shaped like lions and cackling ravens. And in her hand she carried a single rose, petals brushed with green, reminding her how close destruction had once come, and how vigilant she must forever remain. In the weeks that followed, King's Landing braced itself for the possibility of war. Messengers rode in and out with reports from the Riverlands. Some suggested that Brynden Blackfish Tully was holed up in Riverrun with a small garrison, resisting sporadic Frey attacks. Others claimed he'd ventured north for unknown reasons. Meanwhile, Walder Frey's brood postured from the Twins, harassing travelers, seizing goods, and fortifying their holdfast. The region quivered with tension, uncertain if the crown would truly march. Inside the Red Keep, Tommen and Margaery worked in tandem to assemble the royal forces. Mace Tyrell prepared a portion of the Tyrell host to march north from King's Landing, while Kevan readied Lannister men near Harrenhal to converge on the frays. The plan was to coordinate a swift strike if negotiations failed. Margaery corresponded with scattered riverlords, urging them to accept the king's protection and stand against Frey tyranny. She found a mix of eagerness and wariness. Many had learned not to trust the Iron Throne after so many betrayals. Throughout this period, the city itself remained calmer than it had in months. The partial reconstruction of the Great September advanced under Sept and Reynard's careful watch. The bread distribution continued, though Margaery had to be mindful of draining the Tyrell coffers. Tommen's presence was more accepted by the small folk now. When he rode through the streets, they called out blessings and he smiled back. The scars from the wildfire threat remained, but the city carried on. Margaery continued to receive letters from Varys's network. Rumors of Cersei's growing desperation at Casterly Rock, rumors of possible Ironborn raiders testing the southwestern coasts, and still more talk of Daenerys Targaryen gathering allies in Essos. Yet none of these threats felt as immediate as the looming confrontation with Walder Frey. Winter crept closer, the days growing shorter, the nights chillier. Time was running out for a military campaign, if it was to be waged in passable weather. At last, the final pieces were nearly in place. Mace Tyrell had mustered several thousand men in and around the capital, drilling them daily. Kevan Lannister coordinated with a force near Harrenhal. They intended to march once the king gave the final word. Unless, by some miracle, Walder Frey changed his mind. Tommen resolved to give Walder one last chance by sending a final letter, stating that if Edmure Tully was not released within a fortnight, the crown would come in force. When that fortnight elapsed without any sign of compliance, no ravens, no negotiations, Tommen set his jaw and announced to the court that the crown's host would march. Margaery stood by his side as he made the declaration in the Great Hall. She watched the reaction of the gathered nobles, some eager for a quick victory, some anxious about more bloodshed. The city itself buzzed with a mix of pride. Their king was finally acting like a king, and dread, another war, so soon. 2 days later, the banners were raised, and the mass of armed men began pouring out of the city's gates, forging west and north. Margaery stood atop the walls with Tommen, observing the columns of infantry, the cavalry, the supply wagons. Bright banners of the crown of House Tyrell, and even the golden lion of House Lannister fluttered in the wind. Tommen wore gleaming armor, though he looked pale. He would travel with the main force, determined to lend royal authority to the endeavor. Margaery, too, planned to accompany him. Some might question a queen riding to war, but she would not be parted from him or from the seat of influence in such a critical moment. As the drums beat and the men marched, Margaery's stomach churned. She remembered the promise she had made to keep King's Landing safe. That city was behind them now, left under the watch of the City Watch and a small contingent of Tyrell knights. The capital was calm for the moment, yet they marched out to face a new storm. She prayed it would not blow back to consume them all. In the late afternoon, she and Tommen descended from the walls and joined the royal party. Margaery wore a riding gown reinforced with light armor beneath, her hair braided and pinned, a cloak bearing the royal sigil and a small golden rose. She mounted a chestnut mare, ensuring that she looked composed for the troops who gazed upon their queen. Tommen, astride a warhorse, tried to hide his nerves behind a mask of determination. Their retinue included Kevan Lannister, Mace Tyrell, and a cluster of knights sworn to both houses. Along with them rode supply officers, scribes, and a few key courtiers. It was a vast enterprise. They rode forth, departing the capital to the cheers of a crowd that lined the streets to watch. Some tossed flower petals, others held up good luck charms. Margaery smiled and waved, though her heart felt heavy with the knowledge of what might await them. The cavalry set an easy pace so that the foot soldiers could keep up. Gradually, King's Landing receded behind them, the red keep spires disappearing into the haze. The journey westward began. Small folk in villages along the roads turned out to see the king's host pass, some in awe, others worried about potential requisitioning of supplies. Margaery took pains to ensure the troops did not pillage or frighten the locals. She wanted them to see that this king and his queen were not butchers. Under Mace Tyrell's watchful eye, the foraging remained controlled. She and Tommen occasionally paused to speak with local septons or elders, reinforcing the message that they marched only to quell Frey aggression in the Riverlands. After a week's ride, they drew near the border of the Crownlands and the Riverlands. Patrols scouted ahead, reporting that Frey outriders were spotted near the roads, but no direct confrontation yet. Kevan Lannister proposed halting in a fortified location to plan their next move. The weather turned colder, gray clouds looming. The men built camp on a low ridge near a meandering river, erecting tents and lighting fires. Tommen and Margaery took shelter in a large command pavilion, along with their chief lords. Maps were spread on a table. Kevan pointed to Riverrun, located near the fork of the Red Fork of the Trident. If the Blackfish still holds it, we can coordinate with him. If not, we may have to besiege it. The Freys hold the Twins further north, controlling the crossing. They might sally out to block us if we go for Riverrun first. Alternatively, we could try to bypass Riverrun and head straight to the Twins, but that would leave the Tully seat in Frey hands. Mace scratched his chin. I say we secure Riverrun first. That'll rally the local lords. Then we can march on the Twins. Even if Walder sits behind his bridges, he can't stop the entire host if we cut off his supply lines from the south. Tommen glanced at Margaery, who studied the map. I agree with my father, she said carefully. Riverrun is symbolic, and it's a more approachable target than the Twins. If Brynden Tully is there, we might gain an ally inside the walls. Kevan nodded. Very well. We proceed to Riverrun. Our outriders will watch for Frey movements from the Twins. Walder might choose to confront us in the field, or he may wait behind his defenses. The meeting continued, hashing out supply lines, routes of march, and contingencies for the weather. Margaery provided a calm voice in the deliberations, occasionally stepping in when Tommen hesitated. Though he was the king, the older lords did much of the talking, which was typical for a green monarch. Yet Margaery also saw flickers of Tommen's blossoming confidence. He asked pointed questions about siege tactics, supply distribution, and the timeline for success. He might not have the cunning of his mother or the battle-hardened experience of others, but he was learning. The next morning, they set out again, heading deeper into the riverlands. The rolling hills gave way to broader plains, dotted with farms and small hamlets. Many of them showed signs of past conflict: burned barns, half-rebuilt fences. The scars of the War of the Five Kings ran deep here. Margaery's heart clenched when she saw the wary looks on peasants' faces. They had known armies passing through before, leaving ruin in their wake. As the royal host advanced, scouts rode in to report sightings of Tully banners near Riverrun. This was a promising sign that Brynden Tully might still hold the castle. Mace Tyrell and Kevan Lannister quickened the pace. Tommen, determined to be present when they made contact with the Tully forces, pressed on. At last, on the morning of the third day in the Riverlands, they beheld Riverrun from a distance. The castle perched where the Red Fork and the Tumblestone rivers met, its walls tall and proud despite the hardships of recent years. They saw Tully banners indeed, a silver trout on a field of red and blue, flying over the battlements. Surrounding the castle was a ragged cluster of tents bearing the Frey sigil, though not as numerous as might be expected of a full siege. The Frey men there seemed caught off guard by the arrival of the king's large host from the south. As Tommen's army deployed in careful formation, the Frey camps stirred into panicked commotion. Within an hour, Margaery and Tommen stood on a gentle slope overlooking Riverrun's outer defenses. Kevan and Mace organized the lines of soldiers. The Frey encampment looked disorganized, as though they hadn't expected the crown to truly march. A few Frey riders approached under a hastily raised banner of truce. Their leader, a stout man with watery eyes, reined in before Tommen and the assembled lords. He introduced himself as Ser Ryman Frey. With visible nerves, he demanded to know why the king had come to interfere in Frey business. Tommen's voice, though shaky, carried authority as he declared that the Freys were defying the crown by holding Edmure Tully prisoner and laying siege to his ancestral seat. Ser Ryman sputtered, "We act on behalf of Lord Walder Frey, rightful Lord Paramount of the Trident under King." Tommen cut him off with surprising firmness. "Lord Walder defies me by ignoring my demands. Stand down, release Edmure Tully, and leave these lands, or we will take action." Mace Tyrell's men shifted, making their presence felt. The Lannister knights glinted in the sun, an intimidating sight. Ser Ryman swallowed. "I must confer with my men." Tommen waved dismissively. "Do so. You have until sunset to yield. After that, we move in." Ser Ryman rode away quickly, evidently rattled by the combined might before him. Margaery breathed a subtle sigh of relief at Tommen's steel. He had found some measure of confidence. Now they would see if the Freys here had the sense to surrender without bloodshed. They waited through the afternoon, the sun marching across the sky. Attention hung in the air as the lines of Tyrell and Lannister soldiers remained arrayed just out of bow range. Margaery noticed that from Riverrun's battlements, a figure watched them with a spyglass. Could that be the Blackfish himself, wondering why the royal banners flew outside his castle? She hoped they could speak soon, forging an alliance. As sunset approached, Ser Ryman returned, accompanied by a handful of Frey men. His face was pale. He informed Tommen that he had sent ravens to Walder Frey requesting guidance, but no immediate answer had come. They had few provisions to keep the siege, and the presence of the royal host had them outnumbered. Reluctantly, he agreed to withdraw his forces from Riverrun's walls, under protest, and demanded safe passage. Tommen, after consulting with Kevan, granted them safe passage on the condition they leave Edmure Tully behind, unharmed. Ser Ryman insisted Edmure was not at this camp but back at the Twins with Walder. Tommen frowned but concluded they could not do much about Edmure's location now. Their goal here was at least to relieve Riverrun. A wave of relief swept through Margaery. Fewer lives lost. They might free the castle without a fight. By nightfall, the Frey camps were packed up in haste. The men retreated north, presumably to consolidate with Walder Frey's main force. Tommen's host did not hinder their departure, so long as they left in peace. The next morning, the gates of Riverrun opened cautiously, revealing a small garrison of Tully loyalists. At their head stood Brynden Blackfish Tully, tall and grizzled, wearing battered armor and a stern expression. Tommen, Margaery, and their retinue rode forward to meet him at the castle gate. The Blackfish regarded them with wary curiosity. "King Tommen," he said at length, not quite bowing, "and Queen Margaery Tyrell. This is unexpected." His voice held the gravelly timbre of a war veteran who'd seen too many battles. Tommen dismounted. Margaery did likewise. She watched as Tommen approached, offering a respectful inclination of his head. "Lord Brynden, I've come to relieve Riverrun from the Frey siege and restore it to House Tully. I regret that your nephew, Edmure, remains at the Twins, but I intend to secure his release." The Blackfish's dark eyes flicked over the assembled forces outside, then returned to Tommen. "You come with Tyrells and Lannisters alike. Not so long ago, it was Lannisters and Freys who spilled Tully blood at the Red Wedding." He cast a pointed glance at Kevin and the Lion Banners. "Why should I trust you?" Margaery stepped forward, her tone calm but persuasive. "Because we stand against Walder Frey's cruelty. The king demands justice. He declared that the Freys cannot hold your family seat by force. We have driven them off. If you accept our help, we can prepare to march on the Twins to free Edmure." The Blackfish studied her face, then Tommen's. His lips pressed into a thin line. "A boy king, guided by Tyrell gold and Lannister swords. Forgive me if I question your motives." Tommen, to his credit, did not wilt. He said steadily, "I want the Riverlands at peace, and I will not allow Walder Frey to terrorize them any longer. If you wish the same, let us cooperate. Riverrun is yours, Lord Brynden. That is my gift to House Tully. I only ask that you bend the knee in good faith and support the crown." The Blackfish huffed a dry laugh. "I see. You help me keep Riverrun. I bend the knee to a new Baratheon Lannister Tyrell monarchy. Is that it?" Margaery dared a small smile. "We understand your hesitation, but if you doubt the king's sincerity, consider, we've already forced the Freys to retreat without shedding blood. We could have done otherwise. Tommen has chosen a path of reconciliation. Will you refuse to walk it with us?" After a long pause, the Blackfish sighed. "I've held Riverrun against worse odds. With the Freys gone, it'll be easier to supply and fortify. But there's no sense in refusing your help if we truly want Edmure free." He cast a look at the battered walls around them. "Edmure is the rightful lord of Riverrun. I only hold it in trust. If you can get him back, and he consents, I'll bend the knee." Tommen's eyes flicked in relief. "Then we are agreed?" The Blackfish gave a curt nod. "Agreed for now. Come inside. We'll talk further. My men are wary of you, so don't bring too many inside the walls." Tommen signaled Kevin and Mace to hold the main army outside. He, Margaery, and a small honor guard followed the Blackfish into Riverrun's courtyard. The place showed signs of siege. Limited stores, debris from small skirmishes, arrows embedded in the walls. Yet it was still a proud castle, and Tully banners hung from ramparts. Soldiers in Tully livery watched from parapets, clutching spears and crossbows. A table was brought out in the courtyard. Brynden poured wine himself, offering cups to Tommen and Margaery. They sipped as they hashed out the future. The Blackfish made it clear that if Tommen wished House Tully's allegiance, he must deliver Edmure from Frey captivity. Tommen vowed to do so, or at least to attempt a rescue or negotiation. Margaery proposed that the Tully men gather their strength inside River.